Hello, everybody. It's your old friends at Nerds of Us, and welcome to this very special edition of the Best of All Worlds podcast. You may notice from the title of the episode, we're not talking about a specific episode this time around, where this is actually a bit of a final frontier for us, Jerry, if you've pardon the pun, because we're actually going to be reviewing a series, which is something we haven't done before. But if there is an appetite for it, I think it needs to be said that we've both been fans of this series and think it deserves a bit of a cross examination, if you will. So tonight we're actually going to have a straight up review of Star Trek Picard. Perhaps all three seasons, but very much specifically season three. That's just ended up wrapped up this past week as time of recording. And fair to say, Jerry, we were big fans of it. I don't think we can sugarcoat it here, can we?
No, no sugarcoating. I absolutely loved it. Now, to say that everybody would love it, that's not the case. But I do think the majority of fans did love it. There were, I'm not going to say that I loved everything about the show because there are certain things that I didn't like, certain things I thought didn't make sense, but certain things that I absolutely loved to the point of tears. I thought it was very very well written for the most part. There were we'll get into it properly, but
Yeah.
I thought it was very well written. The look of it, it was still that kind of gritty Picard show. It very much has taken a kind of leap forwards in terms of we're not kind of at this utopia anymore, really. And I'm sure if you were on Earth, it would probably still be the same utopia, but out in the actual galaxy itself, it's very nitty gritty, dark. Ferengi getting their head cut off and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's definitely a much darker version of Star Trek than we're used to, but it was just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. From it kind of grips you from start to finish. There's a reason it has a fresh score of 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it actually has the highest. It's the highest rated. It's the highest rated score for any of these Picard seasons. All three seasons, the highest rated one for both critics and fans. So that's really good as well. It's the first Star Trek show ever to get into the top 10 streaming shows.
Yeah.
So that's big. Like that's absolutely huge. And it just for me, start to finish, 10 episodes. Did I feel it was enough? No, I just wanted more. Of
Yeah.
course, you're going to want more. When it starts off, it's a slow burner. You kind of get we have all what's seven of them, isn't there?
Seven.
Seven crew members. So
Oh,
Picard
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
you kind of get one per episode for the first few episodes, and it kind of that works out really well because it's like you want more, I want more, I want them all, more, I want more, and it was just I just thought start to finish it was excellent. It was probably the best Trek we've gotten since the original kind of Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Next Gen,
Yeah.
Enterprise. I firmly believe that Discovery has never really hit the mark with me. I am liking, I do like Strange New Worlds, and we're getting the second season now, and
That's right,
just over a month. Um, Lower Decks, I think, is fantastic. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think it's the closest thing to next generation era Trek that we have, apart from Picard. Prodigy is actually quite good as well. It's all these shows that are coming out are quite good. So it certainly ended on a high for me. Picard did. I know there's a lot of people calling for season 4. Why would you do that? Why would you ruin what is now for that crew with the perfect ending? They never got the perfect ending before. This is the perfect ending. And even how it ended was just, it was obviously a little bit of a rehash of the all good things ending,
Yeah.
but it was a proper ending. Like I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Obviously, this season, I should say, a lot of callbacks to the next generation, but equally a lot of callbacks to the original series, films. Between the ship, the plot line, even some of the cinematography was very
Yeah.
much along the lines of the original series and original series movies specifically. But I just couldn't really. If we were to give this show, if we were to do our normal score
Yeah.
on this show, I'd be given nines and tens
Mm.
for everything because there was just everything you could have wanted. There was emotion, there was action, there was science fiction, there was really good graphics, there was every like, music, like Jesus, like they
Mm.
brought in the First Contact team, they brought in the First Contact music, and like to me, it's a toss up between uh First Contact and the Wrath of Khan in terms of best movie score for a
Yeah.
Star Trek film. Because I actually and just I'm talking about that. I just finished watching the Wrath of Khan. It was on film 4 there today.
Mm.
I just finished watching that, and remember to Jesus, the music in this is fantastic. But
Mm.
they actually did take a lot of the plot points from Wrath of Khan for season 3 of Picard. But of
Yeah,
course,
it was it was kind of like very
we're
intentional, like tongue-in-cheek
yeah,
references, weren't they? Like
yeah,
for people who know, and therefore you can also it's also a very kind of like very quick way of say the showrunners communicating where the story's actually going. Whereas like from say what happens to David Marcus and from Kirk that way, you're kind of seeing the first part of that trajectory. But of course, what's a common thread throughout the Picard series is that it starts off that way, shall we say, and tips its hat. So it'll do something very, very obvious and very in your face, like Beverly Crusher wearing the same coat as Kirk in the Wrath of Khan, which is like that wasn't by accident. That was very, very
yeah,
intentional. But then by the end of the arc, you can see, okay, it actually didn't end. That actually didn't end up as the movies did. It went its own path. And I think this is one of the big triumphs of the series that we'll probably get into now. But I kind of cut off across you there, Jerry. So continue on there.
yeah. As there's a lot of callbacks to the original series. Obviously, you've got a what they're calling a neo constitution or constitution 3. So it is
Mm,
effectively the Enterprise A or original Enterprise back in action, just with a
yeah,
different skin, essentially. Now, it is a lot bigger than the original Enterprise. I wasn't. This was one of the things that kind of for me let it down because I wasn't a big fan of the Neo Constitution. I understood why they did it because they
yeah,
were trying to appeal to original series fans. I get that, but there's more next gen Deep Space Nine era fans now than there is original series fan. And I'm not trying to sound bad by that, but the
mm,
original series fan, a lot of the original series fans, are a lot older now. You know, um, you have to be looking to your newer audience. So I don't know why they
sure,
catered so much to the original series, but some people they didn't like the fact. I'm not a fan. I wasn't a fan of the ship at the start. It has grown on me. I will say that much. It has grown on me. Um, but I just felt this is a next. Essentially it's a next gen show. This was essentially season 8 of Next Generation.
mm.
Um, Give us a Galaxy class. I didn't like the fact that I had to wait 9 episodes to get it, but I got it. Now, for me, it was a thing like you got a lot of inspiration for this show for the ships of this show from
Mm,
Star Trek Online, and the community has been very vocal about that. They're very happy about it. The fact that we were going to be getting the Enterprise F, which was an Odyssey class, and that was specifically designed for Star Trek Online, and it was brought to life.
yeah,
People loved that. Um, you know, I can understand them wanting to bring in like this. This is like obviously the Titan is their hero ship in this show for the
mm,
most part. Um, but again, obviously they were just trying to appeal very much to the original series fans. Even as much as you've got the Shrike coming to find them, and they go into a nebula,
yeah.
and it's the tale of cat and mouse.
Yeah,
Um,
I can see why they went with that route though, and
yeah,
because I've heard this season of Picard described, and I think very very appropriately as the next generation movie we never got.
Hmm.
This is finally the next generation movie as God intended, as it were.
Yeah.
Whereas with Generations, they kind of had the ham fists action scenes here and there, and with First Contact, basically the next generation was never an action adventure show. It was a lot more cerebral. It was a lot more pensive. It was a lot more character oriented,
Yeah.
and that was almost a cross that next generation had to bear when it came to making movies, because obviously the culture around TV shows are changing, and the episodic format was dying out very very quickly.
Yeah.
So they had to adapt with the times. And unfortunately, Deep Space Nine got there ahead of them by doing more serialized storylines and so forth. So that started to they were able to adapt with the likes of your, say, I don't know, like just spitballing here, the likes of your Buffys, the likes of your Supernaturals that had season arcs that were able to keep them going. The episodic format was just not going to work anymore. And Voyager kind of had a nice mix of, like, say, pick and choose your battles with that. And the next generation just kind of had to stand as it was. So trying to make the next generation into action movie stars was always going to be a little bit of a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
Like, was anyone really taking Patrick Stewart seriously as the action hero, especially at the same time when he was as Professor X? You know, kind of way. There's a weird dichotomy with it, and it's the same with a lot of them. You don't see these people as the action heroes. You see them using their brains and be having an intellectual advantage over people than anything else. This is a point I'll come back to shortly when I'm talking about the movies.
Yeah.
So you have these movies like Nemesis, Insurrection, First Contact, where they're all Horatio Hornblowers and they're winning the day this way. But most of the movies were centered around the top three, namely Picard, Riker, and Data. Everyone else was kind of an afterthought in terms of things.
They were very much side quest characters or side characters. That's all they were.
Exactly.
Like I you look at all three of the kind of main next gen films. You barely saw. I think if there was 20 minutes in total from all three films of Beverly Crusher, I'd be shocked.
Yeah, and that's after, like, stuff, the scenes were deleted where, like, at the significant stuff that happens to her as a character are on the cutting room floor and therefore not canon. Whereas stuff like you say with Data and Geordi, that's all cut out of the movies as well. And then this also is down to who, like, was directing the movies and not picking up on specific plot points. Again, a point we'll get back to shortly. But when you were talking about the original the TOS movie series, basically this one from Star Trek 1 to 6, pretty much most of the plot points in those movies are referred to in some way in Picard season 3, and I think that was very very deliberate. That wasn't a fan servicey kind of thing. It wasn't a kind of like a Mandalorian style, like, oh, here's a reference, here's a reference, here's a reference. I think much like the Mandalorian in some aspects, the references are deliberately done to suit the theme and to suit what they're actually doing with the show. But I think it actually does better than Mandalorian in some aspects. It actually gets the theme right, because, as I said, this is meant to be the movie send off for the original cast.
Yeah.
So what better point of reference than having the 6 movies that send off the original cast in the right way? You know, you're basically rattling through those 6 movies in a rapid rate of knots, just using different plot points from there. And like I said, like the 6th Star Trek movie is a nice mixture of, like, the cowboy diplomacy, but also using your fucking head and resolving things in a proper fashion. So when you compare then the next generation cast in the movies, all being action heroes, to the ones in season 3 here, they're two completely different people. However, the ones in season 3 are much closer to the source material than anything the movies and even the first 2 Picard seasons, like, gave up. And that's the difference in knowing the characters. That's the difference in understanding what they're like, how they would behave in that situation. You bear in mind, like, the Enterprise D is seen as a kind of a denizen, is the flagship of the fleet, of course, which means they have to be the best. That is the rule. Like in Deep Space Nine, you can be as cowboy as possible because you're on the frontier, quite literally. But Voyager, rules don't matter anymore. The Starfleet isn't happening in the fucking Delta Quadrant. You can do whatever the fuck you want. So you can bend the rules to suit your narrative. Whereas with the next generation, they had to be diplomats. They had to be the peacemaker. They had to be these people. And in season 3, they were those people again. They gave back to their roots in a certain aspect, and the way the characters were treated and the way the characters were written suit that. Yeah. So much to the point about you saying that they've picked a Constitution class to suit the original series fans. I actually think it was more of a thematic thing, really, because this was them on one last voyage, and that's a direct comparison to the 6th movie, to The Undiscovered Country, where the Enterprise A is essentially out of mothballs. for
Yeah.
one last adventure with the same crew who are also out of mothballs. So in a weird way, it suited the way they were going to tell a story, and by using a refit enterprise essentially as your device for that. And I think that was very well done. This whole show, the whole season, is full of devices, and the vast majority of them landed, which I couldn't say for the first two seasons because there was a
No.
lot of ways of moving in those in the end. But so let's get into it then. So for those who obviously haven't watched the actual season of season 3 of Picard, this will probably not be the video for you. So by all means, skip to the next one on the playlist for when we're reviewing Timeless. But where would you start in terms of comparing this to the rest of the Picard seasons, shall we say? Because I think it goes without saying that compared to even the first two seasons and even some of the new Trek out there, like we said, we sung the praises of Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds already on this show, but I can't see any direct comparison with this season right now. It this does feel, even though it is a swan song for a cast that we know so well, this also feels like an evolution of how Trek is being presented and how Trek is being done. And I find it incredible that they managed to learn so quickly in 3 seasons, kind of way. To which at this point, like I said, with the third season of Picard, I'm thinking they actually can't improve this. They've actually done so much better with this,
Yeah.
And I think the biggest part, the one huge part of it, is dialogue and the way the characters interact with each other. Like it makes sense. Like there's a 25-year gap between All Good Things, or well, probably Nemesis. I can't recall. I don't know what the point of reference is, but it seems like they're kind of skipping the 3 movies. I know they reference them anyway, but they kind of skip character-wise. They skip the 3 movies because they don't fit. So if you're saying 25 years between All Good Things and now, naturally all those characters are different, but the hints of them are still there, and they still act the way you'd want them to in certain aspects. But look, we'll get into it anyway. So your personal highlights from the season, like again, can we put down the season being so good solely down to the change in people running the show and new people being, like, old heads being brought in essentially for one more go? Is it as easy as that, or is there more to it, do you think, Jerry?
I don't, I think it can be as easy as that, and I tell you why. You have somebody, and I believe he's probably one of the finest Star Trek directors that there is, and that's Jonathan Frakes. He directed multiple episodes in seasons 1, 2, and 3. He directed multiple episodes of all the shows, every Star Trek show. So he knows what he's doing. He knows exactly, what people like, what people don't like, what he's doing, what they should be doing, what not. And you look at those first 2 seasons, and even though the episodes he directed were good, you're looking at it going, this isn't what you expect. It's really not. So that's down to the writers and the showrunner, and as to exactly, what way the direction of the show is going to go, to the point where I personally, I've never heard him say it, and he probably never will, but I personally believe that Jonathan Frakes, when they were filming season 1 and they did that copy and paste fleet with the Shanghai, he probably rolled his eyes or groaned, going, they're going to hate this. Because they did. There wasn't a single fan went, isn't that great? No. Star Trek fans like, no, the Federation isn't a copy and paste fleet. It's a diverse fleet of every different type of starship. There should have been Defiant class, Galaxy class, Sovereign class, Excelsior class, or all modern versions of all of those ships. That's what should have been there. That's what it should have looked like.
It was very telling in the start. One of the first scenes in season 2 is 4 new classes of ships being seen,
brand spanking, and all taken directly from Star Trek Online.
Yeah.
The Zheng He, which is the
Inquiry class, isn't it?
Inquiry, thank you very much. I always forget the bloody name of it. That wasn't taken from Star Trek Online. That was a ship that was made and then put on Star Trek Online after it was on Picard. Then you've got season 2, and you're like, right, okay, the fans don't want a copy and paste fleet, but they want new. So let's give them new. So let's go to the one thing that's actually creating brand new ships literally every month, every couple of weeks. And that's Star Trek Online. Mostly, a lot of these ships are designed by fans. The Odyssey class was designed by a fan for the game, and
Yeah.
then now look at it, it's in the show. So you look at season two, and that's the very first episode of season two. You've got the new Stargazer, the Sagan class. Fantastic design, fantastic
Mm.
look, absolutely brilliant. And then you start to see, obviously, the Borg ship is there. You start to see other ships coming in. So you've
Mm.
got like it's like there. I don't know the class of them, but it is the new style of Nebula classes there. You've got multiple sovereigns turned up. You've got multiple Inquiry class ships, and I don't mind if multiple Inquiry class ships are there,
Yeah.
just once they're not all the same. You've got Akira class ships there. You've got the new Excelsior, the Excelsior 2, or whatever we were calling it.
The
That's
Albania
there.
class, isn't it? The
That's the
Albania?
one.
Yeah.
That's the one. Sadly, not around anymore now, but okay.
No. And the Ross
we didn't
class as well. That's the new Galaxy.
the
Yeah.
Ross class, the new Galaxy class, which is a fantastic. Basically, the Ross class is an amalgamation of what was good about the Galaxy class and what was good about the Sovereign class into one ship, and it
Mm.
is probably the most badass looking ship in Starfleet now at the minute, with the exception possibly of the Odyssey class. Um,
Mm.
so you had a really diverse fleet of ships there, and that's exactly what fans wanted. They wanted to see that exact thing. They wanted to see different ships, different designs, things coming from Star Trek Online. That's what they wanted. So you can see from going from season one to season two, they did listen. They listened to the fans. But at the end of the day, season two, obviously, this show is called Picard for a reason. It's about Jean-Luc Picard. Okay, I get that. But I felt season two was a bit too much about Picard. I
Mm.
know the name of the show is about Picard, but you look at season three, and it's not all about Picard. It's about all their individual relationships. It's all
Yeah.
about their individual stories, and it's bringing them all together. And that's why the third season blew the one and two out of the water. Now, I know a lot of people didn't like one and two. I liked one and two. Were they my favorite seasons of any Star Trek? No, of course not. But it gave me things that I liked. It gave me Picard back. It gave me Riker and Troy back. It gave me a little bit of Data back. It gave me Seven of Nine
Mm.
is here, and she's even more badass than she was. It gave me Borg. It gave me Romulans. It gave me Hugh for a short amount of time, but it gave us this deborgified Hugh, which was fantastic. I thought it was good. A lot of people didn't like it. I thought it was okay. Then you get to season two, and it probably gives us one of the best Star Trek characters in all of the series, and that's Q. We
Mm.
have Q back, and you're like, oh, this is unreal. And the thing is, again, you look at Q coming back into it. Again, they listen to the fans, because
Yeah.
you look at Brent Spiner from the first season, and obviously Brent Spiner is a lot older than he was when he last played Data back in the early noughties.
Mm.
So he doesn't look the same anymore. So a lot of people were saying, "Well, why didn't you de-age him?" Because they really didn't do anything. They just slapped a load of makeup on him, gave him a wig that wasn't even correct for the
Yeah.
look of Data from the shows and the movies, and thought, "Oh well, no, it's fine. People will love it." And they didn't. They were like, "Why didn't you do something about this? This is ridiculous." He looks
Mm.
stupid. He did, because he did. He looked stupid. It's still Data. It's still Brent Spiner, but he looks stupid. So they played with that, and they thought, right, well, let's play around with this and have a bit of fun with it. So they bring Q back, and Q has been de-aged, and he looks fantastic. But then he decides, you know what? I'm going to come down to your level, Jean-Luc. Clicks his fingers, and he's old. I'm like, that's how you do it. That's
Yeah.
perfect. Absolutely brilliant. I loved the dynamic in season two between Q and Picard, because Q wasn't Q. He wasn't himself. He
Mm.
was very, very different at the start.
Yeah.
So when you watch season two, you truly believe, and I did. I was like, Q is a proper villain now. I was like, he's a bad guy. He has never. I don't care what people say about the original series, or the Next Generation, I should say. Q was never a villain. He was never a bad guy. He really,
Yeah.
wasn't.
I
He
think
was
you
never
can
a villain.
adequately describe him as Machiavellian.
Yes, he was. He was never a villain. At the end of the day, people will say, "Well, hold on, he introduced them to the Borg." Had he not done that, the Borg would have wiped out the Federation.
Yeah, exactly. They
Plain and
wouldn't have been
simple.
prepared for it at
Because they
all.
would have had no preparation at all. They would have had no defenses. They would have
Mm,
had nothing. And they would have been wiped out and assimilated. So it was as simple as that. He genuinely warned them. When you look back and when you watch all of season two and then you look back on all the exploits of Q, he was never a bad guy. He was never a villain. He was somebody that was genuinely testing Picard. That's what he was
yeah,
doing. Um, so when you look back on that, and it's all hindsight, you're like, you see Q very very differently, and that's what season two was. It was Q not testing Picard anymore. It was Q helping Picard
yeah.
because he had this guilt. He had this shadow over him, and this shadow was even bigger than the Borg with regards
Mm,
to what happened to him, and it was the stuff with his mother and the when you watch it, and you all have been warned. If you haven't watched it, feck yous now.
yeah.
Essentially, his mother was mentally unstable. They couldn't do anything for her. The doctors couldn't do anything for her, and essentially, she convinces John Luke to let her out of her room, where she kills herself.
Mm,
That's probably the deepest you could possibly go with regards Star Trek. You're like, where have you ever seen anything like that in all of Star Trek? You're like, holy shit.
mm,
And Picard has this hanger over him, and it is nothing to do with um changing history or anything like that. Q was never going to let that happen. Q is all powerful being. He is a god,
yeah.
essentially. He was doing this to finally take that cloud away from Jean-Luc, to say, you need to forgive yourself.
Mm,
You need to forgive yourself, because you'll never actually be happy if you don't. And when you look at the interaction in the very last episode between the two of them, they're sitting across from each other, and that's when Jean-Luc actually realizes it. And
yeah.
he actually realizes that Q has never been a bad guy. Q has never been his enemy. Q has always been his friend. So I thought one of the most touching moments in all of Star Trek came when Q says, our time is up now. I might have a bit more cosmic energy to bring somebody back. Elnor died at the start of the show. Q didn't let him die. Brought him back
Yeah.
immediately. And then Q then realizes it was at this point then what this wasn't just clarification for Picard, it was clarification for Q as well, because at this point, when Picard hugs him, he realizes we're done.
Yeah.
We are done now. This is we your trial, your tests, everything is done, and I have done everything I could for you, and you have evolved and you have grown, and they had become friends at that point. So when he clicks his fingers, well, now Q is dead, and I always had an inkling. I was like, there's more to that. There's no
Yeah.
way he's just gone. He's not. He's not gone. And of course, we see the last scene, or I should say, is a after credits, technically an after credit scene of Star Trek Picard season 3. That indeed he is not gone,
No.
and now he has someone else, not to torment, because I genuinely believe he's not there to torment or as they be a villain to anyone. But he's finished testing Jean-Luc. Let's see if we can test his son, because his son is, as much as he is like him, he's very different from him.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if we do get a new show. It'll be very interesting to see where that goes. So now we're going into season 3. I think a lot of people thought at the start of season 3 that we might see even an inkling of the ending of season 2, because the ending of season 2, we had this massive rift in space. We had this massive Borg ship, whatever the hell it was, guarding it. And there was no mention of it other than an offhand remark made by Captain Shaw, which was a fantastic character, by the way.
We will have to talk about Shaw later on, yeah.
But it was an offhanded remark saying, "Oh, that the Borg there that are guarding that thing," and that was literally what it was. I was like, okay, well, obviously we're not getting any of this.
I've seen it described online as Alex Kurtzman joins Space Hall of Death,
That's exactly the one.
which is
Um,
also probably because that's how season one ended as well. Alex
exactly.
Kurtzman joins Space Hall of Robot Machine Death. It was
Yes.
like,
So what a lot of people have been saying, well, hold on a minute. Um, they're Borg, and then we have Borg at the end of season three. Aren't they the same thing? And they're not. Of course, they're not.
no,
The Borg of that Borg that came in that massive weird ship that's now guarding Alex Kurtzman's hole.
yeah,
That's what we're gonna. We're
The
the
Jurati board, let's
the
say, yeah,
Jurati Borg come from an alternate universe and alternate timeline, so
yeah,
they're not the same. It was a different queen, and that queen then merged with Jurati to become this new, all, you know, not all powerful, I suppose, but a more sympathetic Borg. So
yeah.
rather than assimilate, they go around recruiting instead of assimilating. Is
Yeah,
what
it's they're not necessarily. You wouldn't actually identify them as Borg. They are their own race now, and essentially how how the Aenar are a subsection of the Andorians. So would you
exactly,
consider
exactly,
Andorians and Aenar to be different? No, you would consider them to be different. They just happen to
exactly.
be of the same genotype. Is the best way to look
Yeah.
at it.
So they were originally going to call this new Borg collective the Jurati. They were going to
Yeah,
call them the Jurati, but they were like, no, they decided against that. They are still Borg essentially, but they're Borg, but they're not.
yeah.
They're nicer. So essentially, there are two different types of Borg. Not anymore though,
No.
because that's that. So we get into season three. Something is going on. Received a message from Beverly. What the hell is going on? So
Mhm.
essentially, everyone had their theories at the start of this season. Um, I picked up kind of on the Borg. I think it was about episode four, maybe 3 or 4, but
Mhm.
it was only a little inkling, and I was like, is it the Borg? Because then by that point we are like, right, we have changelings, which it blew me out of the water. The changeling stuff blew me out of the water. I have Chewie coming up over my shoulder here now.
That was a pleasant surprise. Now, in
It
fairness,
it,
that was
it was
yeah,
it was great to see something different. It wasn't just the
yeah.
atypical next generation villains. It wasn't just the Borg. It wasn't just Cardassians or
Mm.
Klingons or Romulans. It was something different. It was completely left field, and it was really really good. Um, how they did them, how they looked. It was a natural evolution of the times. They were never going to look exactly like the changelings from Deep Space Nine, because at the end of the day, the technology has changed so much in the last 25 years.
And that too,
But
that
why would you?
they are objectively different, the changelings as well.
Exactly,
So
but they have been altered as we found out in the show. They were altered changelings.
yeah,
At the start of it, um, at the start of the season, when you first see them, you think, well, this is just a normal offshoot of the changelings. They didn't agree with the peace accords, and they
mm,
want their revenge against the Federation. Um, we didn't. We found out that's not actually the case. We found out that these were genetically modified changelings
mm,
that had been modified by the very people who had tried to poison the Great Link, which was Section 31. So I
yeah,
thought even them coming into it then, Section 31 was a great addition then as well. Now, obviously, we didn't actually really see much of them.
mm.
Um, but
Which I'm
I,
glad for, because New Trek has a horrendous fascination or fetish for Section 31, because
yes,
again, and this is also appropriate considering they have a Paramount Plus movie in production,
yeah.
which I think is only solely because they want to get Michelle Yeoh in before her rates go up again.
Well,
Um,
they were getting her in for a show. That was the thing. They were getting her in for a show. Then she won an Oscar. Then her rates went up, and like, let's just get her for a movie instead,
Yeah,
because we only have to pay her
like
once.
in fairness, that idea only is good enough for a movie. I don't think there's enough in it for a series, because in the end, how much more of the Section 31 drum can you beat until it is just
Yeah,
repetitive nonsense? That is just conspiracy stuff and whatever it is, and then a lot of it is kind of ham-fisted. Like you can actually I would hope one of the biggest kind of talking points from this season of Picard is which direction to actually bring Star Trek into for future, because I think the biggest problem that Star Trek has been a real kind of sense of direction for me. Um, and yes, that does have a lot to do with the people who are kind of producing the program. There's a lot of executive producers, there's a lot of directors, there's a lot of writers, and I think it just needs a bit of a narrowing kind of vision for it. Now, I understand also this is Star Trek in a very digital age, and they want to try and bring Star Trek to different markets and to different generations, if you pardon the pun. And I think that's good. I personally think that's a great idea.
Mm.
But it's also very important to be consistent with how you deliver the
Yeah.
content. You know, like after watching Picard season 3, and yeah, granted, I'm a big Next Generation fan. That's my go-to Star Trek compared to something else. I can't adequately look back at. I'm finding too many issues now with the likes of looking back at the Discovery, because you look at how the dialogue is written in season 3, you look at how the characters deal with the conflicts and their situations there. And again, for this Next Generation cast, they are exceptional. They are quite an emotional group in this season, because it's been 25 years and they've had to bottle up angers and frustrations and joys and sadnesses and all this sort of stuff. So it's natural for them to have to deal with this. Whereas with Discovery, they're fucking all over the shop. They're ditzy for no reason, and they're goofy for no reason, and the characters don't have that same emotional resonance that they do have with other casts. And again, it's easy when you've got the Next Generation cast and they're all back for one big hoopah. That's, you already got that part sorted. You don't have to worry about that. Discovery, you have to put in the work to actually make us care about the characters. But you look at Discovery, then you compare that with Lower Decks, and immediately you're loving Beckett and you're loving Boimler, because they're the complete opposite of a Star Trek officer, and that's what makes them interesting. But even then, the ones that are actually meant to be Starfleet officers, your Ransoms and your Shaxes and so forth, they're hilarious because they look so like overly macho compared to the main characters. The contrast is there. So then when you see Strange New Worlds, which I think is the first proper effort at making a new episodic Star Trek show that doesn't have any cataclysmic overarching storylines about Alex Kurtz's big space hole and Prodigy, who's kind of in half and half at the minute, but it's very much a child's show. Look at how Strange New Worlds are setting up the character. They're putting episodes directly. Here's an episode about Noonien Singh. Here's an episode about Spock. Here's an episode about Uhura. They are setting up the groundwork for hopefully really strong seasons for years to come. And I do hope that they do get something out of a legacy out of that. I think what Picard season 3 has done, it's not only sent off the Next Generation cast into a sunset that like 20 years ago they could have dreamed of, because they got movies where no one got a fair shake, and productions and plans that just went the cropper. This was probably the smoothest production they've ever had in their careers when it comes to Star Trek, where every meticulous item is covered, every little nook and cranny sorted out by people who very much are passionate about giving these people a good send-off. But not only have they done that, but they've also set up a solid platform to build on this with a proverbial spin-off show, if you want to call it, that's supposedly going to be earmarked as Star Trek Legacy. You have already set up prime perfect characters to move on to do another show with, and do either something like Strange New Worlds or go in a completely different direction. And I just find it so interesting that like you can actually almost compare the different flavors of Star Trek in amongst themselves, and depending on who's running the show and who's actually in the show as well, that actually defines its quality so much quicker than anything else now. Which I suppose is the same for any kind of like anything like that. Like Marvel will have the same issue as well, where like you're looking at who's a director, and if it's a director is shit, well, fuck that movie. I'm not gonna go for it. Yeah. So if you see Alex Kurtzman's name and I go, right, Grant, I'm gonna avoid that like the fucking plague. But if you see Terry Matalas, for example, if you see Jonathan Frakes, if you see Dennis Okuda, if you see Doug Drexler, you're going, yep, that's my Star Trek. I'm back in the game. And that is going to be the theme for the next few years. I think if they continue with this style of platform, it is going to come down to who's making the show. Is it worth our while? Is it going to be good? Lower Decks, Strange New Worlds has that goodwill coming. Prodigy is the same way as well, because they're all very conscious and respectful of what the work has been done in before. They're referencing it, they're adding to it, or they're integrating what they've done already. Whereas something like Discovery, I think, was very, very clearly trying to go in its own direction and just not paying attention to the source material. Yeah. And I think the first few seasons of Picard was also guilty of that, whereas going its own direction and not paying attention to what it should have been. Like if you're going straight for the next generation to Picard, the dynamic that for Data coming back to life, let's say, or being killed, is not between Data and Picard. It's between Data and Geordi. They were the best friends.
Yeah.
So Geordi should have been cut up about having to terminate Data for once and for all. Likewise with season two, the characters that they were trying to bring more into focus, the like your Rioses and Juratis, they're giving them more content and more of a story, but they had no intention to actually develop them at all. Which is a shame because I think Rios was close, and Jurati I think was dead on arrival. Just the character wasn't sticking. Elnor was dead on arrival as well, unfortunately, which is a problem because he's died twice technically in this show now. But the ones that have landed,
technically, no. I know what you're thinking. That he died. No, he wasn't on the Excelsior, and that's been confirmed.
Has it? Okay, well that's good. That's good. But that means they can use the character again then if they get another show. They won't. But the ones that have landed, the likes of your Raffis, the likes of your Shaws, you like them, I think they have landed more so because they obviously are coming in as one of the more interesting characters, but because they have been given just a little bit of a twist, a little bit of a turn, by people looking and going, do you know what? I can make something of him. I can make something of her, and let them fit into this new situation very seamlessly. Same as 709. Like 709 is behaving as you would expect her to be now, especially back in Starfleet. Everything feels consistent with as you know the characters, rather than just going, fuck what's happened. Let's go in our own way and write as we feel. So I think if anything, the biggest triumph of this season will be not only giving the next generation cast a good send off, but building those characters for the future that you can use again.
Yeah.
So let's get into that anyway. So what would you consider your personal highlights of this season, realistically speaking? Like from start to finish, what were you think are the biggest triumphs of this season, and of course then the biggest negatives?
Okay, so I'll do the highlights for me first anyway. So Captain Shaw was exceptionally good.
You've already got my first one.
Yeah, it's exceptionally good to the point where when you get to episode 9 and you see what happens, you're like, oh, you absolute bastards. How could you do it? How could you kill him? How could you kill him off? And for me it was like, well, hold on. It's Todd Stashwick, isn't it? Todd Stashwick.
Is, yeah.
He confirmed in an interview that he was in 10 episodes, but he just died in the 9th one. It's like, how? And then of course we found out how. Which it was one of those scenes, and that scene for me was fantastic because obviously we get to see the real Tuvok, the real Captain Tuvok back in it. And I still maintain he just, for whatever reason, it's the same makeup, the same look. He just looks strange for some reason. I think it's because he's older, but he just looks like, looking at him going, he looks fucking weird. That was a fantastic scene, and the fact that Shaw as well, he had already said, 7 of 9, you have the con, which heartbreaking moment. But then he says what he says in the holo recording. You're like, oh, you fucker, you. Oh, you're just tugging at the heartstrings now, you absolute bastard, you.
Yeah.
So would I have liked to see a Captain Shaw with Commander 7 on the Enterprise in Star Trek Legacy show? You bet your ass I would have, because I thought he was just a fantastic from start to finish. Like the first time you see him, he's sitting down, he's eating a steak, and they're asking, so can we take the ship? No. And it was just as simple as that one word. No. I'm like, this guy is badass. He just put it up to fucking Captain Riker and Admiral Picard. You're like, holy shit, this is gonna be good. I'm like, could we potentially be seeing like a Starfleet villain? And that's what you think at the start. You do think like, oh god, this guy is actually a dick. He's a bad guy. But then as the series goes on, like after that first conversation that you see him having, the animosity towards both 7 of 9 and Card, you're like, this guy is something to do with Wolf 359, and that was immediate. Then when you see the closing credits from the first episode, you see the star date for Wolf
Yeah.
359, and you see it when his name flashes up on screen, hit Todd Stashwick, and you're like, straight, so he's a survivor or he lost somebody in at
Yeah.
Wolf 359. So as the show progresses, you then you hear that monologue, that little speech he has in the holodeck with Picard. You're like,
It's the
whoa.
rant that Cisco never got to have at
Oh,
Picard.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Now that was the first thing that I thought of. I was like, are we just getting a rehashed Cisco here? Is that what's actually happening? But it wasn't so much that, because he did kind of trust them in a way, and he
Mm.
did let them have run. He contacted Starfleet, and then a whole new kind of worms came along. But that was that.
Yeah.
Um,
But
I
that but that was just it though. It was the same fact where like it's when you said it was rehashed to Cisco. Well, like not really, because there's probably 1,000, 10,000 people who are
exactly, yeah.
like who are going to have a secret, a subconscious animosity to Picard because of
Yeah,
what happened.
yeah,
So it even this is what I was saying about like with season 3, not necessarily like disregarding what happened in the first 2 seasons, but very much putting it to better use than those seasons did. Whereas it makes sense for Shaw to be bitter towards Picard, maybe not intentionally or unintentionally, whatever it is. But then compared to how Starfleet like kind of look at Picard in the end as well, with the likes of Clancy telling him to fuck off, essentially. Like there's probably a good percentage of admirals in Starfleet right now who remember Wolf 359 and would partially blame Picard for that. So that's
yeah,
even that strange moment that kind of feels very un-Star Trek now seems consistent because simply they put a character almost in that midpoint to contextualize everything. And again, that's down to very, very good writing and very good characterization, understanding that these people would exist in this world compared to Picard. In the same way that when, if they ever did something with Cisco, if there was somebody who was in the Maquis, do you think they're going to have a nice, cheery conversation with Cisco? No, they're fucking
no,
not.
no, they're
Because
not. No.
you helped massacre my whole fucking crew, So
Yeah,
these things would happen, they would have past like this. Like a lot was made about Terry Matalas himself because he was the showrunner of 12 Monkeys, and he used up a lot of the ex cast from that in some of the minor roles, like the Ferengi and the Romulans were all ex cast members, and Todd Stashwick was his best pick from there. But I couldn't find a better fit for Star Trek right now than someone like him. Particularly anyone from Picard that stayed in season 3 are perfect fits for this show. Because a lot been made about Michelle Hurd and how she's been kind of triumphing the women of Star Trek in this show as well, and she's absolutely right. I mean, it's fantastic the way they've done it, and they've done it in such a very subtle way that they didn't have to promote it or indulge it in any way. It just came naturally, and that's the way it should always be with Star Trek. And likewise with Stashwick, you have a character who in Shaw starts off the way he is, but he also accepts that he is from a generation of captains that are a bit of a dry shite, So Shaw now, instead of being that villain, falls into the category of someone like a Jellicoe,
yeah,
or what's his other name? I can't remember the guy's name now, but there's been a couple of captains, Ransom, Captain Ransom from Equinox. So they fall in those categories, and they're not necessarily villains. They are vindicated for what they do because of what's happened amongst them or the situation that they're in. Shelby falls in this category as well. Like they're not villains. They're in conflict with our characters that we are emotionally invested in, so we see them in a negative light. But when you write as them, they're not bad guys. They just come from a different point of view, and that's human. That's the way humanity works. We should all have different points of view, and we'll have conflicts and agreements and disagreements, and we should handle them like adults. That's the way it should be done.
yeah.
And
I agree.
the way Shaw dealt with his stuff behind closed doors was the right way to do things, even if he knew himself that he had this survivor's guilt and this animosity unintentionally to 7 of 9. He still does the right thing, and that was very important for the character. I will say, if there is a legacy show, they will find some way to get Stashwick back onto Star Trek, because he'd be such a massive loss without it. I've seen a theory online, and I really, really like it because it suits what Stashwick could do with it. An EEH, an emergency engineering hologram done in Shaw's image. because he was an ex-engineer. So he just basically gets to be himself, but then also like adds in that kind of like that drollness to the role because he's a hologram. So he can go, fuck it, whatever. You know, he could play that role again. You know.
That would be interesting, I have to say, because um it would be a character. You see, an emergency hologram only would works in Voyager because he's the only doctor that they
Mm,
have. That's all they've got. An emergency engineering hologram um, would, I think, would fit into a legacy program, because he's not going to, like, let's say it's 10 episodes, he's not going to be in all
mm,
10 episodes because he's going to be only there when he's really needed. So you could
yeah.
have it come in and just like, oh fuck's sake, you want me to do it again? Like, I did it already. Come on, like, lads, come
Yeah,
on, stop
if
breaking
the
my
burn
ship
if
here.
the forges are stuck with like a kind of an engineering predicament that need help, that's when the EEH is launched and it turns out to
Yeah,
be Captain Shaw and they both shit themselves. Oh, what the fuck are you doing here? You
yeah.
know, that's the comedic part of it then as well. So it
I
takes
do
both.
I do like that. Yes, I really
Yeah.
really do like that idea, because just to have him back would be
Mm,
amazing. He really would be amazing to have back. Um, so in kind of continuing on with pros and cons and whatnot, I'm going to give you one that's both pro and con
okay.
for me. Is the changelings. And
Okay.
I'll explain my reasoning, because when they were brought in, I thought this is the perfect villain to have for this last season of Picard. It was completely out of left field. It was
Mm,
something new, something different, something you wouldn't expect for a Next Generation stuff, because they were
yeah.
predominantly to do with Deep Space Nine. Absolutely brilliant. I thought how they came across really well. Vadik was just,
Amanda Plummer, exceptional actor.
she channeled her father in that performance and did him proud. I can tell you,
But
because
and
she's
appropriately chewed the scenery because she
yeah,
knows she's the villain. She knows she's the bad person in this
yeah,
and couldn't give a fuck. She's still
exactly,
going to chew the scenery, and that I think is a great way of doing it because
yeah,
that character knows that they are being the kind of like the Dick Dastardly of the piece
exactly, yeah. Dick
and
Dastardly are
fully
kind of
leans
like
into
the
it. Yeah,
penguin.
yeah,
She
well,
had, and
yeah,
you could tell she had fun with this, absolutely.
yeah,
So that's one of my pros, absolutely fantastic. And then my cons with regard to changing is that they were just thrown away.
yeah,
It was just thrown away. It was, we got up to a point where they get killed off, or the ship, the Shrike is destroyed. Um, but we're like, we know there's hundreds of other ones,
mm,
and now all of a sudden they're forgotten about, completely and utterly forgotten about, because we now have the Borg. Could that have been done better? Yes,
mm,
clearly. Um, the head that Amanda Plummer or Vadik was talking to was the Borg Queen.
yeah,
Um, but I think they could have dealt with the exit of the changelings a lot better, because all you got was like a 10-second footnote in the last episode of how they were able to put these new sensors into transporters, as that when they
mm,
transported one aboard, they knew it was a changeling. And I'm like, that's it. You're not actually going to give us any more information about they captured the other ones, or they fled, or whatever. Nothing. And I'm like, nah,
yeah,
lads, come on, that's a bit much now. That's a bit much now. I said, that was doing the previous episodes of Changelings dirty, because they were so good. They were
yeah,
fantastic villain, and the fact that Amanda Plummer played it so well. I'm like, no, you did her dirty. You did her dirty there, lads. And I think, as much as I like this show and as much as I like Terry Tallis, you did her fucking dirty. So I
yeah.
didn't particularly like that. Um, let's look at the Titan. Uh,
You mentioned
so
before that you weren't a big fan of the
I,
design.
I wasn't a big fan of the design, because it's a design from a bygone era. Essentially, that's what I feel it is. It's a design that, um, it was put in to cater to original series fans. It was put in for people that liked Kirk and liked the original Enterprise.
Hmm.
That's why it was put in my opinion. That's why it was put in.
Yeah.
You have a Next Generation show, but you have an original series ship. I'm like, that doesn't make much sense to me.
Hmm.
Um, you know, the interior was nothing like, obviously, the old Enterprise. It was
Yeah.
completely, it was beautiful, it was lovely interior. From sick bay to engineering to the bridge. I thought the bridge, obviously, the bridge was just a rehashed um, Sagan class that we had
Mm.
seen in the previous season what was the ship?
Yeah, the Stargazer.
The Stargazer, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just a rehash Stargazer, but that was fine because I really liked it.
Yeah.
Um,
And
because
bridge modules are interchangeable. Like it's reasonable to say that
exactly,
they have the same bridge. Yeah.
exactly. For me, it's like I don't particularly like the Discovery Bridge. I find it way too big. It's way too open. I
It's
don't like it.
bloom, just
Yeah,
bloom and bright and blah.
exactly. I
That's
don't
not
like
how a
the.
ship looks like at that
It's
era. We
it's
know how it
not
looks like. Yeah.
Starfleet. It's not Star.
No.
Oh shit, Jesus, dogs at the front. Just shut out.
It's a change looking behind you.
Hey, buddy. Um,
Yeah.
it was the ship is it did grow on me somewhat
Yeah.
throughout the series, um, but for me then it's another con. It's like, okay, if we're getting a legacy show, it means we're getting a new Enterprise.
Mm.
We have an Enterprise, so if you look at the scale of things from the original Enterprise to the A to the B to the C to the D, E, F, and now G, I feel like the G is just it's gone so much backwards.
You think it's a step back as a ship?
It's essentially a step back because you got the Enterprise D, which was the biggest ship in the fleet at the time. Then you've got
Mm.
the E, who wasn't the biggest ship, but it was the most powerful. It was the most technologically advanced. It was fantastic, lovely looking ship. Then you've got the F, and you're like, holy shit, look at this
Yeah. And the
absolute
Odyssey is a
beautiful.
huge ship. It's a
It's a
massive ship.
huge
Yeah.
ship. It is, you think a Galaxy class is big. This is almost twice the size of a
Yeah.
Galaxy class. So it's
Because that
along the
was
lines.
intended to design. It was designed to save the Romulan aid effort.
Yes.
It was designed to have 2,000 people on board each time. So
Yeah.
a couple
So
of Odyssey class ships going back and forth to Romulus before the star implodes. That's what those ships were designed for. Essentially.
exactly.
Yeah.
And now we've got something that's smaller than the Galaxy in the Enterprise G, and I'm like, I don't get that. You had the perfect opportunity at the end there. So what you could have done was you could have had a shot at the Fleet Museum where the Enterprise D was there, and so was the Titan A. The Titan A could have been retired because it went through the wars and it got torn up during the battle with the assimilated fleet and whatnot. You could have retired it as well, and you could have had a brand new ship. It could have. I maintained they should have introduced a new Ross class.
Yeah.
As the Enterprise as the Enterprise F. But unfortunately, as we are so fond of saying those shows, we have to live with it because that's what we were given. The fact that it was the Titan A was rechristened the Enterprise G, we will see. I thought in terms of pros anyway, I thought the new cast, in terms of the LaForges, the bridge crew, the Titan, and even going as far as to say as Jack Crusher, were fantastic. They were really, really well done. I thought their acting was fantastic.
They're all really good fits for this style.
They really are because it's a very young, vibrant crew.
Yeah.
That's what you've got.
Especially Sydney LaForge, because she feels like an evolution of how Tilly should have been.
Yeah.
Whereas Tilly is like, again, she is like, outside of Saru, is probably the best character in Discovery. I think Saru is definitely for me, by a country mile, the most interesting character of the lot. Whereas Tilly is kind of second at the moment.
Yeah.
And then everyone else is like, geez, I really don't want to know these fuckers at all. Especially when season 2 were around, when Pike and Spock went, oh, look at them! Oh wow, look here, some actual well-written characters. Holy shit! See, Tilly was the Barclay of the crew. So she wasn't your typical Starfleet fit, and she was ditzy and she was dozy and like kind of spoke like in a millennial way, and that was deliberate. That was to kind of like to be relatable to us. Whereas, and then Uhura was kind of that strange new world, but again, because of her youth, you can kind of attribute that to a little bit, and time period as well. You can kind of say, yeah, that language is going to be still there. Whereas then come back to Sydney and you've got the same youthful naivety and innocence there, but also they speak like someone in the next generation. They've got the right terminology and the semantics because that's how people spoke. Even like, again, Barclay being the kind of audience analog back in the back in the Next Generation, he still speaks in technical language because that's the
Yeah.
way it should be done. It's like a Shakespearean way of writing, you know, and either and that's the way I always seen like Star Trek. It sounds like a weird thing to say out of context, but Star Trek has a Shakespearean way of crafting its language, you know. Whereas Shakespeare, like people in the fucking in the 1600s, did not speak like Shakespeare. They did not have ye olde fucking candlesticks and language. That's not how they spoke. But Shakespeare wrote it that way to get his point across in everything being a visual metaphor and everything having subtext and language and using the English language as a way as it could be. So then Star Trek crafts its way of doing that with like naval speak and in very abrupt and professional language, very formal. So then when you have someone like Sydney, who is that nice mix of very clearly Tilly style of personality, of someone who's a bit fish out of water, a bit like, oh, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but still incredibly talented and is going to be brilliant, but she still like gets their point across in the
Yeah,
way someone of her rank should speak.
exactly.
Whereas like
I
Sydney
loved
going,
her. I love. Yeah, exactly. I did
yeah,
love her nickname though. Was it Crash
Crash
LaForge? That's right,
LaForge,
Crash
yeah,
LaForge. That's brilliant because you're setting her up there to be an absolutely badass pilot because
yeah,
that's what she's going to be. She's going to be a badass pilot. You can
mm,
clearly see as well though that there is going to, if we do get a legacy show and these characters are in, is they're clearly aiming to go for a romantic involvement between Sydney and Jack Crusher. That's very very obvious to me. Um, I love the fact that we now have not only captain, but captain of the fucking Enterprise, 7 of 9. You're like,
mm,
I'm sorry, but that is absolutely brilliant,
yeah,
absolutely brilliant. But this is my fear about
okay,
a legacy show. We can have all these characters, all these new characters come in, and then obviously the idea of a legacy show is to encompass, and that's what Terry Metalis has said. If it gets greenlit and he's the one in charge, he will encompass characters from Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, and
yeah,
obviously Picard, and have them all together. I love that idea. I can't wait to see that idea. But to me, and I think this is part of the reason why Discovery fell flat as well for me, was the fact that when you've got a Star Trek show, your main character always has to be the captain. And that's just the way it is. You had Captain Archer, you had Captain Sisko, you had Captain Kirk, you had Captain Janeway, and you had Captain Picard. But yet we got Commander Burnham in Discovery, and it was all centralized around her. And I'm like, centralize it around her all you want, but have her as the captain. It took them 3 seasons to make her captain, and I'm like, no, that just didn't. It just never. It just Discovery for me. It's never felt right. So looking at
Discovery
this,
you look at as a failed experiment now, and that's like that is me being generous because again the season 2 and 3 of Discovery I really really liked. I thought the plot of 2 fell on its arse in the end, but I think they was a good effort. Where season 3 was it at its best. But the real failed experiment part of it was that they tried to make a Star Trek character with one central protagonist, and the world and the show focused strictly around her. And again, it wasn't a bad thing to try out because that's never been done before in Star Trek. We haven't had a show where it's literally just about here's the show about Riker, and the show bends to his beck and call. So it was worth a try. But what you learn slowly about Discovery is that even if you make someone the main character, us as a fan base are more interested in what the other guy is doing, kind of way. And that's what the Next Generation in the end did very, very well. Even in season 1, it was very Picard heavy, but every now and then there will be something about Deanna, or there'd be something about Geordi, or something about Data in later seasons. And those are the episodes we clutch to because we learn something about the character we actually like. We haven't come to it yet in our reviews, but the Barclay episodes are some of the best that Next Generation has to offer.
I 100% agree.
It's just about some random fuck, and he's just here every now and then. Like it's whenever you can get Dwight Schultz essentially on the phone. It's like, hey, do you want to do an episode? Yeah, sure, why not? And
I'll be there.
Those episodes in a mini arc are fantastic, and he carries it on then into Voyager because you have the carry on of that that as it were, the proverbial legacy of the character. Everyone wants to see more Barkley, you
Yeah,
know, and that happened then with DS9 then learns that immediately, from say the second season onwards, because in the first season you've got episodes about Dax, about Kira, about Bashir, about O'Brien, about everyone else. They're all and Garrick, and they're all being set up to start building on this. And you're seeing it with Strange New Worlds. So people are understanding how to make a Star Trek show again. But
yeah,
I understand your concern, because when you see the ensemble cast, the one person that's out of place in the ranking is Jack Crusher, because he's starting
yeah.
off at ensign. So he has to almost be written as the Wesley of the show, and that's just not going to happen, because
No,
you've centered an entire series of the Next Generation Redux around
yeah.
him. So he needs to have something to go on, you know?
Yeah, and I think the ending as well was very telling where their head was going there, because you have him going into his quarters. He puts the
Mm,
he puts the ship up, he puts the picture up, turns around to see Q, and it's being set up that if we're to get this legacy show, that it's going to be, I'm not going to say Q heavy, but we would certainly have Q coming in and testing Jack.
yeah,
But it needs to be done in such a way that it's like that. It's a Jack Crusher episode rather than a
yes.
Jack Crusher show.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the big point they're going to have to do,
yeah,
and I understand this as well from someone who writes as well, in kind of storylines like this, because if I'm doing a season of, say, again, I'll use my RPG as an example, or like even the radio dramas in between. So for radio drama one, let's say, okay, I know that this character is A story, B story, C, and rattle all the way down. And then for season one, right, let's jump up the order. Who's B story for this season? And then C and D, and go from there. Same again, shuffle the order around. So if Jack Crusher, if this legacy show is going to work, you need to shuffle Jack down a couple of pegs and then start building up your characters in between. So
yeah,
if you got something for Raffi and Seven, let's build them up, because
yep,
they're 1 and 2 in the casting call. Likewise, if you want to build the Forges up, if you got new characters coming in, if you got legacy characters coming in, let's just say, for argument's sake, they bring in someone like Harry Kim, for example, into the fold. This would be the right time to bring a more experienced, erudite Harry Kim into the fold, or even someone from, if you want a legacy character from DS9, if you got someone like, say, who would be a good fit now at the moment for this? If unfortunately, if Aaron Eisenberg was around it, you'd say Nog,
yeah.
just time wise, but you get someone kind of equivalent. So
I've got someone actually. I've got someone.
go ahead, yeah.
Okay, we don't. You look at the crew there now at the minute,
Mm,
and you don't really have an engineer per se. You don't
okay.
really have that kind of chief engineer or anything like that. Now, I wouldn't say make this person chief engineer, but you could certainly make them an engineer or even a junior engineer and have them build themselves up. But I think this person could be great for this type of cast because they're still young, and could fit in properly. But what about having a engineer Molly O'Brien?
Oh, that would be interesting. All right, yeah.
Because then you've got Molly, you're nearly guaranteed a cameo from the chief,
Yeah.
and you're like, yeah,
Mm,
I'll take a bit of that any day.
yeah.
Um, but
I wouldn't say no to Kestra being brought into as a character as well. Because there was no mention of her in season 3, and she kind of seemed to be a bit of an afterthought. So if they're gonna continue on the legacy, then having the Riker Troy child would be kind of interesting, because she should be at the same age that should start being if she is going to Starfleet, she should be a cadet at this stage. You
yes,
know. So
um,
that's a possibility too. But
that's it.
again,
But
there's various ways around it.
needs to be, and we need to have the central focus though be on the
Mm,
captain, and that it needs to get back to that because, I just felt like, you know, you look at Picard season 1 to 2, it's about one particular character, but you do have interchanging arcs with other characters.
mm,
But we need to go back to the format of the captain is the main character, and then you've got the side characters, but they all have their individual episodes and their individual relationships and individual
mm.
missions and things going on. Have it that way. You could absolutely do it in such a way that the main character is Seven, that she's the captain of the Enterprise. They're going on the adventure of the week, as
Mm.
Stranger Worlds is doing. But you could also have the side characters. You could even have something to do with Jack Crusher in every episode.
Yeah.
Um, but it just it can't be the focal point of every episode. It just
Yeah.
can't.
They need to
Um,
learn the lesson from Discovery that it just
yeah,
doesn't work in the end. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, actually, if we're having this conversation of like pros and cons, the one thing I would say is that the biggest con, or sorry, the biggest pro, I should say, from this season has been the even distribution of the cast. And what I mean by that is that the biggest issue when you look back at the movies, especially Nemesis, is a big offender for this, is that a good percentage of the crew had nothing to contribute in that movie. It was essentially Picard and Data. That
yeah,
was the crux of the movie there. And again, that was understandable because Data was being killed off at the end and Picard was facing his, Tom Hardy clone, which is again that happens every now and then to all of us. We've all faced a Tom Hardy clone in our lives. Um but and you'd be lying if you didn't yourself. The thing about it was that in this show, I think it was very important to Terry Matalas himself and perhaps to the cast that everyone had got something to do with this, that they all saved the proverbial day in their story. And you can rattle down the list. Picard obviously saved the galaxy because that's what Jean-Luc Picard does. Riker, his arc from the full season, because he was pretty much a mainstay through the entire season, outside of maybe one episode, where in fairness he needed a break anyway. But he was the mainstay through that, and his acting performance and his way of emoting was absolutely phenomenal. Like a certain few highlights would be the fourth episode where they have this really beautiful Farpoint-esque ending where they realize they're in this kind of alien womb and they see it give birth, and it gives Riker this kind of new lease on life because he never got over it as the death of his son. It got hidden really well in season one in a sense where he was kind of put on a brave face. He just seen Picard for the first time in years, and we have a mission, let's go and do it. But in reality, like once he got back into space, he realized, I'm actually safe here because I don't have to remember my dead son, and that kept going on and on essentially. So even for the second season of Picard, where we know he's not around, he's not shown in the episode, we can assume he was probably on the Bridget of Zheng blowing up planets because that's what he does. But so you can already assume that like the Riker's got his stuff and his arc was complete because he finally got this kind of new lease of life, and he stopped feeling sorry for himself and reflecting on how him and his marriage with Troy kind of faltered. So that was one thing. Yeah. Then you got Worf. My goodness, they ever make Worf into a comedic genius in this episode. Like, whoever said Klingons aren't funny?
Well, they're lying because they're absolutely fucking hilarious, and this season absolutely proved it to the point where you have him come in and be more badass than we have ever seen him, to the point where the very first thing you see of him is him impaling some poor fucking Romulan in the back with his new giant sword. Now, obviously, the sword design is taken from his is it the Daktang or the one he used in Deep Space Nine? So it's very similar to that, just a bigger version of it.
Yeah, it's kind of cutlass style, isn't it?
Exactly. But they wanted him, basically, Matalas said is that he wanted to keep the essence of his Klingon sword or Klingon weapons before, but also give him a samurai look. Because obviously, samurai weren't these angry people running around. They were very calculated. They knew what they were doing. Yeah. They were in control. So you see him be absolutely badass. He saves Raffi. Brings him aboard, and he's like, I am Worf, son of Moog, house of Martok, Rojenko. Would you like some chamomile tea? And you're like, what the fuck? Would you like some chamomile tea?
It was just the way, it was the delivery. It was just like, son of Moog.
It was. Michael Dorn just played it absolutely brilliantly to the point where every single episode he was in, there was something funny. But even though that was good at the start, his stuff with Troy and Riker will go down as probably the funniest in Star Trek history because it was brilliant. I was thinking about your wife. I'm like, what? What did he say? What?
It was the fact that like he was being so, he thought he was being so gentlemanly about us. Like I have thought of nothing but you for the last 25 years. Like, dude, I'm right fucking here.
Yeah,
like, we're still married. You know, it's like the reason would be was because it was like that really daft fucking little bit of the last season where they're trying to set Troy and Worf up. It's like that's just really well done.
Even the bit though, like, and I thought this was, because it was actually in the trailer, but the fact when you see it in the episode,
Yeah.
it's not that it makes so much more sense. It's just it flows really nicely. I
Mm.
should let you all know now that I have chosen pacifism, and Riker's like, "Oh, we're all going to die." Now that would have been a perfect point for an F bomb. Let's be
Yeah.
honest with you. Oh, we're all going to fucking die because he could have said it like that, but it was just every interaction between the two of them, between Riker and Worf, was brilliant to the
What
point where
was it?
tries to pick up the sword. Shit, that's heavy. Why do you carry that thing around? It's so heavy. Swords are fun, and but it's just so nonchalant. It's like swords are fun.
Sorts of fun.
Clearly, swords are fun. You had a phaser in this the whole time. Just absolutely brilliant.
Mm.
Like even the stuff, we've always known that Data has been hilarious, but even like the comedy in this season was second to none. It was absolutely
Mm.
brilliant. But the stuff at Wharf was just it was great. Like even the bit where they've won, everything is
Mm.
fine, and he said,
He's covering now.
like he's fucking asleep on the Enterprise D bridge. He's like, and I love, like, I don't know whether you've seen it, but Bernie Sanders, politician in America,
Yeah, the meme I've seen that.
the meme of him
That's
asleep,
funny.
they've transplanted Worf's head onto it. I'm like, that is perfect,
Yeah.
absolutely perfect. Worf was certainly a highlight for me.
My personal favorite of that as well, when they're going into the hangar and they're saying, like, well, obviously we can't use the Enterprise Z. The all turn to him goes, that was not my fault.
Yeah,
It's just like, because then you're
so
trying to imagine now, okay, what did actually happen to that poor ship? Like,
what has happened to the Enterprise? Clearly, the Enterprise is no more. She's no
I got
longer
blown
around.
the fuck up, is what I
She
would
got
say.
blown the
Yeah.
fuck. But see, this is the thing about it, is that when you look at the Next Generation crew, they were always going to be more associated with the Enterprise D than they were the E, and it
Oh
might
yeah,
have been bigger and
absolutely.
more
Yeah.
powerful and this, that, and the other. But she only lasted for three movies, and that was it. And
Mm.
it's a thing
And
where
even Star Trek Online, it only gets a couple more years anyway. Am I right in saying? I think even
start
I think the novels give it a couple of years until the
the,
F comes
the,
around.
the novels did it was originally in Star Trek Online,
Yeah.
but they got rid of that story. So basically, essentially, what happened was, before any of the newer stuff came out, they wrote in Star Trek Online that Data had been reactivated in the way of B4. They'd taken his memories from that. They had rejuvenated B4 and given him all new positronic stuff and created new Data. And he was the one who had become captain of the Enterprise. The Enterprise had then been modified to kind of update it because there was a conflict with the Borg and with the Klingons during the start of Star Trek Online.
Yeah.
They have since changed that, so obviously they changed it to kind of have it more in line with canon. But the Enterprise F is very much alive and well in it, and it's captained by an Andorian.
That's right. Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but it's captained by an Andorian. The ship itself is absolutely fantastic. But Worf is in Star Trek Online, but in a very different way, very very different way. To the point where we get that he's still an ambassador, and he's on the Klingon High Council and whatnot. You have a storyline as well when you play a Klingon character, that you have to rescue somebody from Rura Pente, and you find out it's Alexander, and he has become a warrior and whatnot. But by the end of the arc, Alexander dies, and it means that Worf is alone. Eventually you learn as well during the storyline is that a guy, a Klingon called Jempok, challenged Martok to single combat for the Klingon for Chancellor, and won, and he killed Martok.
Yeah.
So, like, there's the House of Martok is still there, but that's been decimated now as well because of another Klingon faction decimated it, killed Martok's son, so there are no sons left. So, essentially, Worf is the only one left in the House of Martok. We do find later on that Martok wasn't actually killed. He was gravely wounded, but then was taken away and imprisoned. but
Mm.
he's still alive. But Worf in Star Trek Online is very different than Worf in the show, and I'm
Yeah.
very happy about that because Worf in the show is absolutely brilliant. I thought when I first saw, when we first saw those images of all the crew back, you're like, this is cool, and it came to Worf, and I said no. I immediately said no, but I was like, no, it doesn't look like Worf.
Mm.
And people are like, what do you mean it doesn't look like Worf? I was like, Worf never had a mustache in the middle.
Yeah.
It was always just two bits here that flowed out. He never had a
Mm.
mustache in the middle. I'm like, no, and I don't agree with this. And then you actually see him in the show. I'm like, I couldn't care less if he had mustache, no mustache, fucking horns for all I care, because he was brilliant,
Yeah.
absolutely
I'm,
brilliant.
I'm
Like,
actually just looking here, by the way. The last before we get to Picard, based in timeline wise, the last time we see um the Enterprise E is actually in Prodigy.
mhm. Now
And
it's they don't name it, they don't allude to it, but you do see on a nacelle of a sovereign class,
yes.
NCC 1701E. So it is part of the fleet kind of thing that happens in Prodigy. If you haven't watched it, I won't give you the game away completely.
Yeah, yeah.
But people are saying, "Oh, that's where it was destroyed," but essentially, a lot of the ships weren't actually destroyed at that point.
They're just disabled, weren't
They were
they?
disabled. The Defiant was there as well, by the way. I just want to point that
Hmm.
out. And look where the Defiant is now. So that's that. Again, that point is also something that I found very interesting. People were saying when the Enterprise D was revealed to be back, I'm like, yeah, okay, it's cool to have the Enterprise D back. But then I saw a meme, and I'm like, oh, that would have been actually so much better. That you have the crew splits up, because what's better than one ship? Three.
And yeah,
So you have, say, Raffi and Worf go over and they take the Defiant. You have Seven and someone else go over to Voyager, and then you have
yeah.
the rest of
I
the crew.
really
Then,
thought that's where they were going to go with this. They were
yeah,
going to do a kind of Avengers Assemble, and like fucking Janeway's going to be on the Voyager, and fucking Ben Sisko's on the Defiant, and that sort of shit. Like, because
yeah,
like his old shit, the Saratoga, is in the museum. So
hmm
thinking like, oh, is he going to take on the Saratoga, and they're all just going to fucking like drive their ships into the Borg cube or something. But I'll be honest, the way they did the
it,
finale was
it
rubbish.
was
Yeah,
done well, but
done well.
we were talking obviously about the individual character arcs. There wasn't one that didn't hit home.
Yeah.
The stuff, the
The
personal
Forges
stuff.
having the emotional turmoil, Data
Exactly.
finally becoming human was just like a really
Yeah,
understated part of the show. But considering that season one was so data heavy, I think that was good. That
it
was
was
just
done
my
well.
conversation about like bumping someone down from B to D and not necessarily making it feel like any less significant,
Yeah.
because you just pick your battles. You can do the work in 2 scenes instead of five, you know. Whereas with like Beverly Crusher had the most work to catch up almost, therefore she was the B story.
Yeah.
Same with Deanna kind of coming in late into the season. Like she saves the day in the end. She actually pilots the Enterprise to say to where exactly they want to be. And that leads me to my biggest pro of this show is that the actual ships move like they're ships this time. Because my biggest problem that I had with the first 2 seasons of Picard, and it's a problem overall with New Trek generally, is that it's all a bit pew 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 pew, pew. Everything's moving around too quickly. Like Discovery do a very realistic take on what like a space battle would be now, in that they have the Enterprise serving as a sort of aircraft carrier for the little drones to buzz around and do all their work. And yes, that is probably the way it would work. But the way we know it to work is that the big dreadnoughts turn and move around like battleships and aim and shoot. So the biggest example of this, and again, it was kind of like smartly done over the season, but it's that moment the Shrike used the portal weapon, and the Titan almost slowly but very inevitably moves through the portal and through. That's a very TNG action scene.
Yeah.
Is that like the music is kicking in, so the music is covering for how slow the scene is going, but it's realistic. It's how you'd expect these ships to move. And then similarly, they're aping the same kind of camera shots they would do for certain moments of the Enterprise D coming out this way and swooping around, and all these are different things. And then suddenly for the grand finale, right, let's switch things up. Let's do a Millennium Falcon run through the Borg cube. And it's just like a Galaxy class should never move this fast. And then
No.
realizing, oh, it's Data piloting it. Yeah, that's probably why.
Yeah.
Because he's doing faster than the computer would, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. See, this
Yeah.
is the thing. I saw people arguing about this on Twitter,
Mm.
and I was like, people saying, "Oh, they just copied Star Wars." I'm like, so what?
Yeah. So what?
I'm like,
Like it's yeah.
just watch it and enjoy it. Stop being such a fucking bitch. And like at the end of the day, yes, okay, it's essentially a battleship. Should it
Mm.
move like that? No, it should not. Was it cool to watch it move like that? Yes, it fucking was. So shut up and just enjoy it. Because at the end of the day, when you see that scene and it's like Data takes control and he starts flying it towards the Borg cube, and they're all giving
Mm.
out, "No, Data, you can't do it. Just you need to give me this chance. Like I can feel it in my gut." And it's how he says it and how they do it. And then the bit where Troy goes, "I'm sensing enjoyment," and he's like that. It's like it's so good. Like
Yeah.
I love how they did Data for this season. He was one of my favorite characters and the fact that we didn't actually get him that much in it. So I understand why, because
Yeah.
the movies were so data centric and the first season was so data centric that I'm like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But
You didn't have to
they
put
were
in as much work for Data this time because he was already
exactly.
there. Yeah.
Exactly. They were able to do as well that Data looked so bad in the first season. They were able
Mm.
to then use how they brought Q in and how they aged him.
Yeah.
They were able to explain that we now have Data back, but he looks older because he's actually human now, because this was a human body supposed to be for Sung, who
Mm.
unfortunately died, and this is actually Data now. And the internal struggle that he had with Laura and how he kind of trapped Laura, and that was fantastically done.
Mm.
But now
Great,
Data,
a great moment as well because
yeah,
he gave
exactly.
that little bit of hat tip to Tashiar as well. That
Exactly,
was
yeah.
really fun.
That was love. I know at that point, it was at that point I'm looking at going, is it Sela? Is Sela the big bad here? I was convinced Sela was the big bad
Mm.
here. But obviously that they didn't come in. Then you've got like Data's always had a personality, but it was almost like a Vulcan-esque personality because there was no emotions. Now he
Yeah.
has emotions, now he has feelings, now he has a proper human body.
Mm.
His personality is fantastic. I loved, when we get to the bit where it's a year later and he's getting
He's social
actual
counseling.
counseling sessions with Deanna, and he was like, "Right, I'll see you tomorrow," and she's like, "Oh fuck," and that, oh, just brilliant,
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. The fact is that it's a year later, they're all still close together, and I'm like, I
Yes.
love that as well. That's
It's
just
brought them
brilliant.
all back together.
They're
Like
all
it's
back together.
yeah.
Everyone's back together, and we're sticking around. I'm like, I love that. Um, I thought the stuff with Crusher and
Mm.
Picard was actually really well done.
Yeah.
Um,
You get the feeling
I
finally these guys, this cast was finally able to do the dramatic acting they wanted to do
yeah,
for years on the show, but
exactly.
never were able to.
They
Especially
were
that
brilliant.
dynamic between yeah.
I met Crusher at Dublin
Mm.
Comic Con. I didn't find her to be the most warmest of people. She was okay. She was, she wasn't the worst person I've ever met in my life, but she wasn't
Yeah, yeah.
exactly warm. I understand these people do all these cons and they're tired and
Yeah.
whatnot. So she wasn't the nicest of people per se. But I have to say kudos to her because she was fantastic in this season. She was
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. Um, she had a few standout performances in the show. The many conversations she had with Picard and with Jack and whatnot, the emotion she showed in the end, even the funny bit where like, okay, let's go in, and she starts shooting everything at the Borg, and they all turn around and go, "What the fuck?
Mm.
What did she just do?" And she was like, "A lot's happened in the last 20 years." I was like, "Yeah, you become badass like Worf."
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant, so that was fantastic. Um, Edge Spieler, who plays Jack Crusher.
Mm.
I'm sorry, but I'm not buying it that he's in his early 20s because the man's nearly the same age as me.
Yeah.
Now I know that me and him do not look the same age. I get it, but I'm not buying the fact that he's in his early 20s. The man is actually 35, 36. So
Mm.
you should have done it in such a way that, okay, she got pregnant straight after Nemesis, because that would, timeline wise, that would have actually worked.
Well, I would have made the point. Like, I think it would have been a very good way of kind of taking advantage of Crusher being missing for a season in season two, if there was that kind of that one night of passion when they all had the drunken phase in the
Yeah,
third episode, and she got pregnant on that night, and she went off then to
yeah.
Starfleet Academy to have the baby, the kind of thing, and then
But
suddenly a year she's come back, like, so yeah, but that
But the
would have
thing, the
been
thing
too
is
much
though,
time.
I understood that because me and you talked
Yeah.
about that. I understood that, and I'm like, actually, that would fit really well because it's around about the 34, 35 year mark. But then I'm
Mm.
like, oh, actually, if that was the case and that's what she did, she's a terrible mother for leaving their child for six
That's
years
the thing. Yeah,
afterwards.
it would
You know?
have crucified Beverly. So no, that
Yeah,
that would be
absolutely.
right.
So the cast were fantastic. Even
Mhm.
I'm not the biggest fan of Raffi. I thought Raffi was actually better in the first two seasons. I thought in the start of this one, she was very wooden.
Yeah.
You look at her when it was so silly at the start of it.
Mm.
When you find out she's actually working with Starfleet Intelligence, but she's doing this whole like, oh, she's a junkie.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, but the way she did it, like I don't know the name of the movie, but I think it was Steve Buscemi was
Yeah.
in the film, and he was like, "Hello, fellow teenagers," and they're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"That's basically what it was like." It was like her coming in and go, hi, fellow drug addicts.
I would like to do with drugs.
Yeah, I would like
Yeah.
to do drugs, and also, have you got information? I'm like, oh, it's so bad. It was
Yeah.
so bad, but her interactions then with Worf and the stuff that she did with him was absolutely brilliant. So she
Yeah.
did really
Great.
good
A
there.
great idea to pair those two together
Yeah,
because, again, you could genuinely see the pieces falling into place for where the analogs of these characters were going to fall. If there was a spin off, obviously Jack was going to be the Picard analog. You've got the Riker analog in Seven. You've got the Worf analog in Raffi, and you've got the LaForges, you've got the Crushers, you've got all of them in place already,
yeah,
and just those few other characters you want to throw in on top of that, they can come in naturally as well. Because if you're missing a Troy analog, here's shocker, just make one. Like it's very easy to make new characters if you write
yeah,
them well and give them a
absolutely,
start.
yeah,
So like yeah, I think also one of the biggest pros to this season as well for me is the legacy characters they threw in, the ones that you weren't expecting to see. Very minor ones as well. The likes of like Pulaski getting a reference, having a ship named after her, these sort of things, the Excelsior, all these other like little throwaway ones there. But the two biggest ones would have to be, well, the three biggest ones, I suppose, would be Tim Russ, Elizabeth Dennehy, and Michelle Forbes. Just you would not have put your money on any three of them appearing in this season. And actually, as well, we'll throw in Walter Koenig as well at the end of the season, which I think we'll start with that one because I think that was actually the most poignant of them all.
I thought how they did that was fantastic. I don't like the fact that it hasn't been confirmed yet, but I don't like the fact that it looked like they killed him off. I'm like, he's there for
I
10
don't think they
seconds and
did. No, I don't think
the
they
way
did.
it
No.
did look like that. We need to get you to escape pod, and then it cuts out. You're like, oh fuck,
Yeah,
is he
but
dead?
that's
But I love the fact, okay, it's not actually Chekhov, it's Chekhov's son. That's fine.
mm,
But the fact that they named him Anton Chekhov.
yeah.
So it's not only a callback to Chekhov himself, to the original Chekhov, but to the newer Chekhov, Anton Yelchin, that died, who played
Mm,
Chekhov in the newer films. And I thought that was a lovely little tribute. For me, though, we got Rolar and we got Tuvok, which was fantastic. We got Admiral Shelby,
yeah.
brilliant. But for me, like I did a little giddy dance when I heard Mael Barrett's voice
Yes. That was beautiful.
and it wasn't just that one scene. Now
Mm,
commanded by Captain Jean-Luc Picard, I'm like, okay, we've heard that exact thing before.
yeah,
I
that was from
didn't
Henry
mind.
Pratt. Yeah.
I didn't mind we heard that because it was fantastic. But then we actually heard her again saying something different. Now, I don't know exactly how they did it, but I know that when she was recording a lot of the lines for the computer,
Mm,
she did hours and hours and hours more recordings so that
yeah.
her voice could be used far into the future. And I loved that she did that. And I loved that they brought her back for
Mm,
this because it was the big for me. It was like one of the really big highlights. Like to hear her voice again was just
yeah.
amazing. But of course, for me though, throughout this whole season,
Just on that point, by the way, before
yeah,
you land on that one line Riker says last season or in the last episode, it feels good to hear that voice again. It's just like just a small thing. Didn't need to be in the show, but that was Jonathan talking to Miguel Barrett, and I
What
really appreciate that. That was
I
beautiful.
absolutely agree there.
Yeah.
The fact that they had her voice and then he said that, I'm like, that's fucking great. I love also the bit as well where Picard said, I can't believe the one thing I missed the most was the carpet. And I'm like, that's great, that's absolutely brilliant. I have seen a lot of people give out online, and unfortunately, when it comes to Star Trek or Star Wars or anything like this,
Mm.
you get these people coming out of woodwork, but they're like, it's not the same bridge. I'm like, what do you mean it's not
We
the same
know.
bridge? Like, but what you mean it's not the same bridge? And they're not giving out about the fact that it's not the next generation bridge. They're not giving out about the fact that, okay, next generation bridge changed between seasons 1, 2, and then 3 for the
Mm.
rest of the show. They're giving about the fact that it doesn't have the side consoles like it did in Generations. And I'm like, suck a dick.
Yeah, because Jordy didn't like them, so he got rid of them when he was
Yeah,
rebuilding it.
but
Pretty
I loved the point where they come onto the bridge and they say
Mm.
computer lights, but every, like, the consoles all light up individually,
Yeah.
slowly, all the little
And it's the
buttons light up.
same
Like,
actual lighting as the next generation because again the one a very kind of common issue with the ships nowadays is that everything's so dark, and it's unnecessarily dark as well. Like it's one kind of thing that kind of throws me off a little bit because again each show can look different if they want to. Strange New Worlds has very bright lighting, but it kind of falls into the same trap sometimes of having very kind of dark and gloomy areas as well. But that being said, it works if you have a dark and gloomy episode, like the episode where they're attacked by the Gorn. It makes sense if everything's covered, it's obscured in shadow and dark. Whereas in normal times, it should be nice and bright and optimistic. It suits the theme of the show, and
yeah,
it suits the type of thing you're on. The same way, like with Deep Space Nine, the first thing they did was kill the lights, make it make it murkier, make it more urban looking, and it suits the show. Voyager the same way, like it's you have an aesthetic that suits the show you're going for. And I think I'm glad they didn't change that for these last few episodes
it would have
because
been it would have been a
has
thing
to be
that would
said.
they couldn't change it. They just
Exactly,
couldn't.
yeah.
They would have been crucified if they had have done that.
Mm.
Now, to say that when you actually see them on the bridge in the last episode, the bridge is slightly darker, but it's not like the doom and gloom that you would see on the other shows.
Yeah,
It's
if you
still
compare
fairly bright.
the two bridges together, like the
Exactly.
Enterprise is looking shiny compared to
Exactly. Yeah.
like yeah.
But a couple of other, just before I get to the biggest pro, a couple of other pros. The Enterprise F coming out of Space Dock, I think, looked fantastic. We've got that Frontier Day stuff, all the fleet together. Now, I didn't get where they were going with that though, because of like the entire fleet,
Yeah.
the entire fleet, really. There's only I think there was only about 100 ships there,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit more. It's like, that's the entire fleet.
Well, that's after like the Utopia Planitia, our shipyards being blown up as well.
Yeah,
So
but
is
that was 15
building
years.
and
That was
decommissioned?
15
Yeah.
years beforehand. So
Yeah.
that's it. Are you
Yeah,
telling
I
me
guess so.
Are you telling me you pulled all the ships from the border?
Yeah, and all the
That's it.
inquiry class, the copy paste fleet
Yeah,
is still there. Yeah.
I'm like, what are you talking about here? So the way I see it is, this is obviously the kind of like, they had fleets as such when we had the Dominion Wars. So you had the first
Yeah.
fleet, second fleet, third fleet. So I'm saying to myself, this must be like the first fleet, and that's the first fleet that was always
Everything in the
guarding.
Andromeda cluster, shall we say?
Exactly. So the first fleet was the one that always guarded Earth. So it's like, right, that must be the first fleet, because it's not the entire fleet, because you don't only have 100 ships. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
But I did like that. I liked the formation. I loved, as I said, I haven't been the biggest fan of the Titan A, but I loved the cloaking and shooting of the Titan A during the battle. The phasers, I'm a stickler for wanting things to stay the same.
Yeah.
So when you
consistency at the very least.
exactly, yeah. So when you had the phasers in Discovery, the way they shot, I didn't like them. I was like, no, I hate that. But so the phasers in this last episode, they're not the same as the Next Generation phasers, but they're similar. So I'm like, okay, I can live with that. I can live with it. But then the biggest pro, I'm sorry, the biggest pro of anything, and if you don't agree with me, you don't agree with me, it's fine. But the biggest pro was seeing the it lights coming on and it leaving the space dock, and it's just the Enterprise D
Mm,
was back and back in a big way. She was beautiful. We finally get her in 4K high resolution.
mm.
Absolutely
With the
beautiful.
scorch mark from the
With the
movie as well, which
scorch
is
mark.
just
The fact that it's
beautiful
still
with the
got
detail. Yeah.
the landing marks, and like Geordie hadn't cleaned her yet. I was like, Geordie, for fuck's sake. Well, she got in there and
Mm,
she blew the shit out of that Borg ship. I'm like, yes.
yeah.
And it was the original phasers, the original torpedoes, the flying along. Even when you look at ships in the new era of Star Trek, they warp differently.
Yeah.
But she didn't warp differently. She warped the
She did the
same.
exact
And
same
it
thing. Yeah.
was absolutely brilliant. It was beautiful to see her back. I was so afraid though. I was like, they're gonna bring her back, and then they're gonna blow her up. And like they didn't
I thought
blow
the
her
same
up.
thing. Yeah.
I'm like, we got that beautiful shot near the end of the last episode. And that was again another throwback to the original series films, which was
You mean the
it
two
was
ships
the
kind of
two ships
parting like that? Yes.
the two ships
Beautiful.
flying together above Earth with the sun coming up, and I'm like, yeah, that's yeah, all of that, all day. Give me
Mm,
all of it cooked in my veins. I like the fact that the ship is now at Geordie's museum, rightfully so. We're exactly where she should be.
yeah.
Pride of place as well, because she's actually right beside. And I have to say, I was like, that's a nice little nod as well. She's right beside the Enterprise A.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that gives you the level of importance that they gave to her, is that
Mm.
the two most famous ships in Starfleet are together and they're side by side. I'm like, that's yeah, I like that.
One
Um,
thing I also was really, really proud of at this show is that I think it's actually the only proper, like, let's say we say the series, like a proper TV show outside of one of the movies that actually acknowledged the NX-01 to the extent where Shelby talks about Captain Archer and you
yeah,
hear his music in the back, the Archer's theme as she's talking. It's like, you fucking thank you.
yeah,
It took
they
you
did
so
it.
fucking long.
They did it. They did it.
And
You've
in the
got the
background
music.
is the
Yeah,
NX-01 refits as
yeah.
well. It's like
The
no one has
fact that
ever
it was
seen
the
that.
refit, yeah, the
Yeah,
fact that it was the refit, and it was the refit that we never got to see.
never got to see. That is
They've
exceptional stuff.
yeah, they have confirmed as well that had Enterprise gotten the fifth season, it would have been one of the first two episodes. She would have been brought into space dock and redone. The
Yeah.
refit would have been done with the secondary hull, and I'm like, oh, look at what we could have had, lads.
And again, the answer is Terry
Jesus.
Metalis. He was on
Yeah,
Enterprise. That was his baby, and lo and
yeah,
behold, the NX-01 is there in the background for people to see.
yeah. But
That's
you
exceptional
see,
stuff.
Metalis, he just got it right, and the way I look at it is that when you compare this season to anything, if you could compare this season to anything, what would it be? And to me,
Mm.
it's the Mandalorian. That's what I compare
Yeah.
it to, because you finally have somebody at the helm who knows what they're doing in terms of, writing, directing, producing, stuff like that, but is also a hardcore fan. That's
Yes.
what John Favreau and Dave Filoni are. They're hardcore, lifelong fans. They just get it like we get it, because that they are us. They are us. They are fans like us. And Metalis just gets it to the point
Mm.
where he has absolutely set up everything that needs to be set up to introduce a new show, and now it's
Mm.
just over to the Paramount to actually green light it. Now it was just the last 2 days actually that Alex Kurtzman himself, because obviously he is still the head honcho of the Star Trek franchise.
Yeah.
He has come out on Twitter and said, "We have heard you loud and clear, and we'll see."
I say he is fucking raging that this has worked
Oh,
out.
I
He must
guarantee
be
you, he is like,
livid that
he was
someone's
like,
done it better than he did.
he's like, I gave you 2 seasons of Picard, I gave you 5 seasons of Discovery, but it takes this little shithead to come in. And all the cast have said it. Every one of the cast has said it, that Terry Metalis just gets it.
Yeah.
He just gets it. And it was like, Terry Metalis has come out and said he wants to be showrunner of a Legacy. The ideas are his, that he wants to do this. Some of the crew have now come out and said, like, Crusher has come out and said that, yeah, absolutely want to see this. 7 of 9 has been one of, like, sorry, not Terry Farrell, Jerry Ryan has been one of the most vocal people saying, let's do it. Let's get this series done, because she's captain of the Enterprise now. We've got the Enterprise G. She is going to be at the forefront of this show. Do it.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, she was one of the best characters in all 3 seasons of Picard.
100%.
I was so afraid that we were only going to get her in season one. The fact she was in all three seasons, she became commander in the third one, and now captain in the fucking Enterprise.
Yeah.
How, how proud is Admiral Janeway at this point that her baby Seven of Nine is now captain of the Federation
But
flagship?
and that's the beautiful thing about this is that like that is an episode in of itself is
Yeah,
that potential interaction between those two. But not only that, but like so much has happened to Seven of Nine in that time. In that like obviously she's now if she's in this relationship with Raffi, that is completely new information to Janeway. She will not have known about this. So even for Star Trek, again, like there's certain kind of like almost checkpoints in kind of Star Trek history where you kind of see how progressive people can be. Like back in the 60s, the check was having a black woman working alongside white men.
yeah.
And we in the 2023 do not understand the significance and gravity of that to the extent where if for her when Michelle Nichols wanted to quit the show, the person that talked her back into doing it was Martin Luther King. That
Mental.
is something that we can that gravity will never be accepted by us. For like even like one of the great positives for Discovery has been its inclusivity. The fact that we've had a gay couple and literally first episode, bam, gay couple. There you go. And we're not pulling any punches here. You're seeing every bit of this gay couple. And that is one great positive of that show. In the same way that they brought in trans and non-binary people and crucially non-binary actors and trans actors to play these characters and not forcing people to do a role they're not comfortable with. Likewise, then with Strange New Worlds, their first blind actor being Hemmer, and again, he's a blind character, so it works. It suits what they're doing, and they're not doing something that isn't right, you know. So again, having a potential gay captain of a starship is an important landmark in Star Trek history as well from a production standpoint, because then you're telling different stories. You're just giving people something different, and again, you're giving people in the LGBT community, especially in a time where they are being fucking targeted by sinister forces. You're giving them something to grab onto, and that kind of gives a bit of hope, because that's what Star Trek should be. It's about hope. It's about optimism. It's about the future. So having a lesbian captain is not only like common sense. It's something that should have been done years ago, and now this is kind of putting that to rights. You know, um, so I do hope in that sense. I think the group they have right now are ideal for a Star Trek series, and I really hope they'll get picked up.
I think they'd be mad if
Because
they didn't. They
yeah,
would because
it's more about the people, the actual actors themselves. For me,
yeah,
that kind of deserves that. Like I think Todd Stashwick deserves a run as Shaw again. And again, I've never thought like this way about other actors. Like, the guy who played Chris Rios, I liked him. I thought Rios was great, but I
yeah.
never thought to himself, I'd love to see him with his own show. He didn't. He was nearly
No,
there. He was nearly there with the attachment, but I think it was more the actor being funny with the whole like the holograms and like, oh look at me with an Irish accent. Oh look at me being British. Oh, potato. That to me was I found that hilarious.
it was great.
But,
Yeah, it was
yeah,
great at the time, but like that again, you didn't think, oh, I'd like to see a Rio series. But
yeah,
from the very first time you see Seven of Nine in the first season, you're like, I want to see a Seven of Nine spin-off.
exactly.
You
Yeah,
you
like that
said
was
you
already in the
everybody
pipeline. Yeah,
said it. People wanted to see a Seven of Nine spin-off, or at the very least a Voyager spin-off that had Seven of Nine at the forefront with Janeway.
yeah.
That's what people wanted. Like the Metalis has actually come out and said he had a cameo written for
Mm,
Janeway for this season. He had a cameo written for Captain. Finally got promoted Captain Kim. But he
mm.
was actually shot down because of there were budget concerns. But now I can understand budget concerns because I'm sorry, look at the cast they have.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
huge cast who obviously would command huge money. So I'm like, okay, fair enough. Tim Russ obviously came in and did it. You've got Ro Laren and Shelby as well. Obviously, they weren't commanding these big money things. But it
But
was
the fact
good
they
to
even got
see them.
Michelle Forbes in for the episode to give the character a send off that was
Yeah,
deserving of her, rather than just being like a kind of a question mark if she was killed or not by in the Maquis. Now she
yeah,
has now she was brought back, and again, it was the kind of same thing where like the deaths actually felt like they actually kind of hurt in this season. They
yeah.
weren't cheap deaths. In a weird way, because we like the one episode we're like, holy fuck, we're actually getting Ro Laren back. I want to see, oh, she's dead. Fuck. And same way, like the moment we're falling in love with Shaw, fuck, he's dead. Even the
Yeah.
Vulcan on the bridge was so well written as a
I
Vulcan.
ha yeah.
I'm raging she's been killed.
Yeah, I'm raging myself. I was like,
Because
"Oh, you
the
fuckers,
actress
yeah."
was brilliant as a Vulcan. She
Yeah.
got what it was to be Vulcan. Like, fuck, why'd you kill off the one person who knew how to do it?
She did the
Yeah,
she did the eyebrows. So I was like, "Oh, that you bastards."
yeah.
You know,
Like
but
like that, but we should be angry about that because that's how
yeah,
a character that should be treated.
yeah.
You're actually livid, you're angry
Yeah.
that this person's been killed off.
But I
As opposed
have
to
to say
Vatic,
no.
you
Yeah,
know,
well, yeah, exactly. Now I have to
fucking
say,
solids.
Vatic got a nice. Vatic did get a good death. She was like
Yeah,
fucking solid, and so
that was so funny.
at that point you see her going outside, obviously flying outside the ship. So you think, okay, well the ship's just going to pick her back up and it's fine. But then you see her smashing, like, oh, oh shit, sorry. And then when you have Captain Shaw coming in, it's like, it's your call to 7 of 9. Okay, target the strike, all weapons, fire. And the way she said fire, I'm like, oh my god,
Mm,
getting hot flushes here. Woo.
yeah.
And then it just the ship annihilates the strike. I'm like, yes, absolutely. Now, would I like to see more about the changing? Yes, of course, but that's neither here nor
But
there
again,
now.
that's a story they can pick up now if they do
They
the
could
spin.
absolutely,
As you
yeah, they
said,
could.
there's so many little threads you can pull from all of these different shows because like you can bet your ass there's unfinished business from Voyager, definitely some in Deep Space Nine, and you could even argue there's some from Enterprise that
Yeah,
you can like you'd almost certainly say that because there's a temporal Cold War and all this sort of stuff, maybe it raises its head in the 25th century. We don't know.
yeah.
There's so many things you could pull on here. A legacy season, a legacy show that revisits storylines and plot points from previous shows would be very, very interesting. I don't know if it have enough traction to get there on its own, but certainly a subplot here or there would be very, very interesting. Like what's happening on Romulus, for example.
Well,
Um,
there is no Romulus. That's the thing. Romulus is
well, that's what I'm
gone. So
saying. Like what's happening
so
with the Romulus?
where are
Yeah.
the Romulans? Have they a new homeworld? If you were to take some of the storyline from Star Trek Online, it's actually been split. So Romulans have been split in half. You've got the Romulan Republic who are now allied to the Federation, and
Yeah.
then you have basically the old Romulan Empire that's being run by the Tal Shiar. So they don't have like a praetor or a senate or anything like that anymore. It's
Yeah.
being run by the Tal Shiar. So
But then you have
it's
something like
very.
say, how is Cardassia recovering from the occupation
We
of the
could
Dominion?
get Garrick back then, as
I was about to say we could get Garrick back while we still have him. Yeah, exactly.
we could
Use
have
these
like a
people you have
situation.
them.
Yeah, because obviously, clearly, he's like a leader there now. So I would
Yeah.
like to see, exactly where he is. I would actually like to see, is Martok still knocking around? That's good, but I have to say, because we got Worf back in this, and Worf kind of looked, 99% of Worf looked like Worf, and now we've got the trailer for Strange New Worlds, and the Klingons look like Klingons again. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, okay, the lads, listen, you have listened. You have taken it on board. We've got Klingons, we've got D7 battle cruisers, we've got absolute badass in season 2. Can't wait for that. But for me now, it's going to, I know this Stranger Worlds is now the show, like not the showrunner, the head show of the Star Trek franchise now. It is their head honcho. It's the one that they're going to lead the charge with in terms of this. I think the fans very much want to see a legacy show. I want to see a legacy show. Once it's done right, you could absolutely revisit lots of things. But for me, this was the perfect ending to a perfect show that was the Next Generation. They got the send off they deserved. Nobody died. But all I just keep thinking of right now is poor Laris is still sitting at that bar looking at that fucking sunrise, and he hasn't turned.
I thought the exact same thing at the end of the show. I was like, what happened to the fucking Irish Romulan? Is she still there? Is she waiting? Like,
She's on that planet waiting at the bar, waiting for him to come around to watch the sunset, and like he hasn't turned up. And the fact that it went a year later, I'm like, oh, you evil bastard, John Luke.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what they did, they very much forgot her. It might have been it might have been a time constraints, or it might have been a budget thing, or it might have been something that was like, we have to cut this because this last episode is already an hour and 5 minutes long. We have to cut something. So I'm assuming they cut it for timing reasons.
It was very evident the stuff that's like Metalis like hated from the last 2 seasons because he just scraps it completely. Like the Borg stuff from season 2, he must have hated. So right, that's being fucked out. No mention of the Doratis. Elnor, fuck that guy, out, killed on the Excelsior. I don't care. Laris, fucking love interest. You already got Beverly there. She was the original one, the original gangster. She's gotten turfed out as well.
See, the
All this other
last
stuff.
scene, that after credit scene, kind of, it makes you think. Wait, has something actually happened between Beverly and John Luke? Because when Jack goes into his room and puts the picture down, it's the two of them from one of the movie premieres holding hands, and I'm like,
That's right. Yeah.
what's going on here? The fact now is, well, she's an admiral and she's the head of Starfleet Medical. I'm like, the fuck? She was
Mm,
on the run for the last 20 years, blowing up shit. Now she's the head of Starfleet Medical. It's just crazy shit. But
yeah.
it really does, I think if the producers and the executives and the likes of Alex Kurtzman and Terry Matalas actually do listen to the fans, I think the future of Star Wars is getting brighter, not dimming.
So Star Trek as well.
Oh, sorry, Star Trek. Sorry, Star Trek.
But your point is right though. Your point is right though, because you've had this probably the exact same conversation with Star Wars. When you
I
have
did,
people who are
yeah,
in charge that know what they're doing
yeah,
and know the product,
yeah,
the actual quality of the product just goes up exponentially. And that's
yeah.
what you want.
Now the only thing is that before we kind of finish up, um, I am worried about a show that has been announced because they have announced that they're bringing in Starfleet Academy. And
Yes.
I wouldn't have an issue with Starfleet Academy show because people have wanted it for years. People have wanted to see Starfleet Academy, and I'm like, okay, I'd be up for that. But they've set it in the Discovery era, which is the
Mm-hmm.
31st, 32nd century, and I'm like, are you really listening to the fans? Because clearly we don't like Discovery, and now you're making another show that's in the same era as Discovery. How is that going to work? It's not going. How is it going to even still be the same Starfleet Academy? Because Earth is no longer part of the Federation, or
Yeah, it's
maybe it is,
rebuilding
or
the
maybe it's
academy story.
So
Yeah.
what's actually going on? I'm like, I had no confidence for this, but for me, it's like this is just another Kurtzman show.
It's a Kurtzman vehicle. I think you
I
need to.
I, I want to see
Yeah.
Kurtzman piss off. Give
Mm.
me Terry Matalas. Give Terry Matalas the keys to the kingdom, and we'll all be happy.
Yeah. Like I said, I think there's a lot of leeway now for other projects as well. But certainly like this is the at the moment I think the blueprint for Star Trek is changes every year for
Yeah,
me. Because sometimes it was that kind of that fun aspect of Lower Decks, then there was the episodic style of how Strange New Worlds are doing it, and now you look at the respect that this season of Picard has had to the work gone before in terms of canon and stories and characters, and you look at if you're going to do a Star Trek season, you do not necessarily have to look at the past, but acknowledge the past. You know that
yeah,
there's characters and there's stories to use here, and you know what? There is a show that's doing that already, and that's Prodigy. Prodigy know that already. They are using legacy characters quite well. But even like legacy characters you wouldn't expect, like Okana, like what the fuck is he doing there? What the fuck is Jellicoe doing in a proverbial kids show? But it suits the stories they're taught they're telling, and it's not just for that kind of demographic as well. It is adding that little bit of canon to everything else. It's filling one blank and another blank and a different blank just every now and then, and that's good for it too. The Starfleet Academy thing, I think it's a blessing in disguise is in the 32nd century because essentially it can't ruin anything that's gone before at the moment. It's too far. It's far off, way too far off at the distance that we don't have to give a shit about, kind of way. So yeah, I think there's a blessing in disguise in that sense. But look, I think actually the one final thing we had to talk about before we wrap up is I think the biggest difference between the first two seasons and season three is the music.
Oh,
Now, an
hugely.
actual score to this season to the show. That's the biggest difference is a score. This is what the shows have been missing, and again, much like we were talking about with episodes of we've been reviewing, you don't really realize you're missing a score until it's gone, until it's not there,
Yeah,
and I think that's been abundantly clear when we were watching this.
yeah.
Uh,
It's a thing for me is that um you don't get an intro or your normal intro that you normally get with Star Trek shows that you've had with Discovery and you have even with the Next Generation the way it was. You just get the name popping up, but you also get the theme from First Contact. But
Yes.
what I thought they did really well with this was that they got the team for first contract, but then the end was the typical Picard. That like that little whistle at the end. I'm like, that's
Mm,
actually really well done. But then the music throughout the episode was fantastic, absolutely amazing. And I tell you, at one point, I thought, and I think this was probably one of the best points of conveying exactly what was going on, was the point where the Enterprise D turns up at Jupiter and it sees that kind of the swirl in Jupiter, and
yeah.
it's this music of pure and utter dread, and you're
Yeah.
like, that is fucking fantastically done, amazingly done. The fact then that we did get the score from First Contact, that was to me quintessential Next Generation. I'm like, yeah, I'll just hook
Mm,
that shit to my veins. That's all I need. Um, will I rewatch the first two seasons? I will, of course, absolutely, but I will be absolutely fast forwarded through the music. But I'm like, because the music just doesn't fit anymore. Because
yeah.
when you have that First Contact music, you've got that new score that they were using throughout the show, and just that music blew it out of the water.
Yeah.
Like I've said this many times before, music can make or break either a show or a film. If you had a different person doing the music for, say, Lord of the Rings, the movies wouldn't have been as half as good, because the music made a lot of those scenes and they made them better. So when you
Mm,
look at that last episode and the music that's in it, it's mind blowingly good. From the
yeah.
fight at Earth between the Titan A and the rest of the assimilated fleet, to the Enterprise D arriving at Jupiter, it just bang, it ticked all those boxes. You're like, yeah,
I think it's the closest
absolutely,
I've been to actually buying the soundtrack of something I've watched. Like
yeah.
I don't buy soundtracks. I don't do anything with that. But like I see that coming out on vinyl, and I don't even have a vinyl player. But there's a part of me that goes, I need to respect this. I need to buy this. I need to have this.
I would buy a vinyl player just to be able to do it, just to be able to
Yeah.
listen to it. What I'm actually just as I'm saying that now, I'm actually going to search on Spotify
Mm,
to see. Yeah,
yeah.
so there you go. The original series soundtrack, Star Trek Picard season 3, is already on Spotify.
Yeah.
It's already there. Um, wow, it's you actually, if you look at uh, a kind of original movie soundtracks from Star Trek, they're very short. They're
Yes.
very short. Like I find I've listened to Generations and First Contact over the last few days, and unfortunately, you're only getting around about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. Looking at this now, this is actually 2 hours 30 minutes, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna enjoy the hell out of this.
Mm,
I'm going to enjoy the hell out of this, because even looking at some of the names of the stuff, right? So you've got the first one's called Beverly Crusher, then you've got Old Communicator, Hello Beautiful was Riker's line to the Titan, Leaving Space Dock, I Like That Seven, Breaking the Beam, The Shrike, Picard's Answer, Riker and Jack Call Me Number One, No Win Scenario. It's even the names of some of the episodes. One is Klingons Never Disappoint. I'm like,
mm.
oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
The LaForge's Dominion, Lower the Partition, Hail the Fleet, You Have the Con, Make It So, This Ends Tonight, Battle on the Bridge. Oh, I'm going to listen to this now.
Yeah. I think Jerry's cover for the night. Yeah. But
Oh, I am. Yeah, I am.
yeah.
Absolutely.
As you can tell from us guys, it's two, three, four, fucking several thumbs up for Picard season 3. I think it's just changed. It just shifted the yardstick up again for what Star Trek can be, especially this new generation. And who knows? Hopefully they can get a commission out of this, and hopefully they can continue the story, because I think there's a story to continue now. They've done something with this.
Yeah.
And again, I think the best thing they could have done is to leave this as they did it last time, with a poker game around the table.
The best ending to could have possibly done, and
Beautiful. And again, it was just like they just let the car let it roll through the credits. Let us see
yeah,
them just having fun, and it was very poignant, and it was very beautiful. And again, the
yeah.
best thing about it was no one had to die. There's no
No,
cheap deaths.
no one had to die. No cheap deaths. That last scene as well, was a full roll of about an hour to an hour and a half of them actually just playing poker between the seven of them. I'm like,
Yeah.
That's fantastic, you know. So
Yeah.
I thought a great ending to a fantastic season, a proper send off for the best crew in the fleet,
Mm.
and exactly the way I would have liked to see Next Gen finish. It was absolutely fantastic. No season four, please. You now have to let them not let them retire
Yeah.
and go off into the sunset. A few cameos from one or two of them in a legacy show,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I can
But
see Worf coming back. I can see Troy. I can see Riker doing bits as well. But
I can
probably
see
Data. Probably
I
Data.
can see Data, absolutely see Data above anybody else. I think
Mm.
you could
And Geordi,
definitely,
of course. Yeah.
you know, if we've got a legacy show, you could potentially see Raffi going off doing Starfleet intelligence missions with Worf. So in like
Yeah.
the odd episode doing that, absolutely. You could see Riker possibly commanding a new ship. I could absolutely see that happening. You
Mm.
don't want, you know, they would want him doing that. I'd like to see, because Data is still at this point a commander.
Yeah. Well, no, he's no rank. He's not ranked at all. I don't think
No, he's not, but he would be a lieutenant
he would be
commander. So
command.
you
Yeah.
know, he would be lieutenant. So I would like to see him even as a number one to somebody, or
Mm.
you know, I wouldn't want to see him as a captain immediately. You know, I'd like to see him as
Yeah.
number one to somebody, and stuff like that. But um, just to me, it hit all the right marks, and I'm very happy with this season. And
Mm.
long live the D, long live the D.
Absolutely. Long live the day. But yeah, with that then, guys, we're gonna wrap this review to a close. Hopefully, you've enjoyed listening to our ramblings and musings about the show that we really really enjoyed, and hopefully you enjoyed it as well. I mean, by all means, let us know in the comments what you thought about it. I'm sure if you do have opinions on this show, you're more than willing to share them, and would love to have a conversation with you in the comments. Do you agree with our assessment? Was it the best Trek you've seen in a long time, or did it fall short? Again, let us know. We'd love to hear from you in that sense. Normal service will resume on our next episode of Best of All Worlds, where we are going to keep reviewing episodes and try and find the best episode of Star Trek that we can find out of any of the shows that we've gone before. So if you're watching us talking for the first time, we actually do this on a regular basis, not necessarily reviewing series, but we review episodes. So by all means, check out our back catalog and check out the episodes we've reviewed before, and see which one we have currently top spots in our table. If you want to actually hear us do more reviews of Star Trek series as they finish, by all means, we'll be happy to oblige. Like I said, Strange New Worlds is coming out in a couple of months' time. Lower Decks is going to follow short soon in the autumn rather. And again, the Discovery is there as well. If you want to have a discussion on that, we will happily oblige to whatever you guys want to hear. Probably not Discovery though, because it is a bit shit. But either way, Jerry, thank you very much for joining us here for this fantastic review. Is there anything you'd like to plug on your side before we sign off for tonight?
At the minute, no. I still unfortunately have not got back into streaming. I'm hoping to get back into it soon enough. I was going to try and do it before I went on holiday, and I was like, what's the point in doing that? I'd come on, do a stream, and then I wouldn't be back for a few weeks. So I'm hoping to get that up and running. As always, I still have the idea of doing the new podcast, which is I have it's still written here. It's your round. Again, it's another get the finger out of the arse and do it situation. But I kind of things have kind of normalized and work now and kind of get my shit done. So, watch this space and fingers crossed. In the next few months, we'll see a few exciting things happen. So, fingers crossed.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So yeah, in that case, then we are going to be back with our regular scheduled programming then next very very soon. Where the next episode we're going to be reviewing as part of our character arc, but also pivoting towards our time arc of episodes we've been reviewing. We're going back into the archives of Voyager, and in fact reviewing their 100th episode, which is called Timeless, where a aged and grumpy Harry Kim and Chakotay saved the day and rescued the Voyager from what was a very icy death. So hopefully you join us for that then, and see if it challenges our top contenders at the top of our league list. Jerry has his favorites and does not want them to be a challenge whatsoever, but we have a scoring system for a reason, so we shall see if it does get challenged. If you enjoyed this content, if you enjoyed listening to us We do this again on a regular basis, so subscribe to the Nerds Roast channel. Even if you're not a fan of Star Trek, but enjoyed our bit of back and forth there, we do tons of content on the channel, ranging from stuff like comics to wrestling, gaming, and football managing is what we're doing now as well. And we have our regular wrestling RPG as well. So we do a great load of challenges and content here for you guys to enjoy. So hopefully you give us a subscription and give us a follow, and hopefully we get something that you will enjoy. But for now, Jerry, as ever, we'll sign off in traditional means with as ever.